Yeah, welcome back. We're a full team today. Elvis Preslin is here. He's back after, well, a day's break. I'm here, and of course, ever present is Kendall Mahamati in the naughty corner, as it's become known. Now today, well, it's an interesting day. We've got commemoration of a Khoisan freedom fighter and 3 indigenous warrior kings who at different periods were captured and then incarcerated at the castle of Good Hope after having led various wars of resistance against first the Dutch and later the British settlers here in South Africa. Interesting events today, Elvis.
Very interesting events, because these events mark the anniversary of South Africa's oldest building and sought to correct the historical biases and inaccuracies around our shared and often very difficult history, and to also advance reconciliation and nation building.
Yeah, so that's the question on your screen. Should South Africa's history books be rewritten? It's a discussion that's going to start at the Castle of Good Hope here on the big screen. That's in Cape Town. That's actually inside the courtyard, inside the castle, for those of you that don't know. So we also, actually we go one further with a poll we're running, just to see how people are thinking around this scenario, Elvis. We actually put the word decolonized in there.
Yeah, should South Africa's history books be decolonized? Because that is a conversation started by the students, as you can recall, this entire year, where they want our history also to be decolonized. So the question we pose to you, should that be the case? 67% are saying yes, 33% are saying no. 92 votes in as yet, 23 hours to go. You can count your vote as well. Let us know what's on your mind. We'll be going live to the castle in a short while.
Yeah, at SABC Newsroom, of course, is where you can interact with us in real time. You can go to our Facebook page and write if you have a long comment to leave there. We'd love to hear what you think with regards to today's show. Anyhow, a lot of other stuff happening. Let's get an update from Elvis.
The Castle of Good Hope is holding a national tribute in honor of 3 indigenous warrior kings and a Khoisan freedom fighter in Cape Town this morning. Former SABC acting CEO Phil Molefe is expected to testify before the parliamentary inquiry into the SABC today. And President Jacob Zuma and his Zambian counterpart Edgar Lungu have promised to review all bilateral agreements signed between the 2 countries to ensure they mutually benefit their citizens. Now, those are all your headlines, but before we get to the news, let's find out from Kendall Makamate what's happening on the sports front. Very good morning.
Gentlemen, good morning to you. It's Friday morning. You've got something to say?
I've got something on my chest. I tried to watch the farce at Newlands last night.
The farce at Newlands?
I found it, the box against the Proteas.
Oh, yeah.
After a little bit, I tried to even get my family into it. They were having none of it. And it kind of got worse as it went on.
I agree with them. I didn't even want to watch it. I don't want to watch the Springboks having fun before they win a rugby match. That's what I've got to say.
Everyone's pumped them this year, including the Proteas. It's a bit harsh.
It's a little rough on the Springboks, but they really need to get the act together. Until then, no fun for you in the naughty corner like I am right now. Good morning to you. This is what we've got for you in the sports today.
There's no doubt about the winner, though. Chad's done it again. Leclerc wins it. The world record at that. Look at him.
Golden boy Chad Leclerc does it again, breaking his own record to set a new mark in the 100-meter butterfly in a time of 48.08 seconds.
There's always room for improvement, whether you're sitting on a 90% tackle completion or 85% tackle completion, there's still 10%.
Even though the Blitzbok are on a high after winning the Dubai Sevens last week, they have no intention of taking their foot off the pedal.
To give for Mkhitaryan, running at goal, and the former Shakhtar man, Mkhitaryan scores for Manchester United.
Manchester United advanced the last 32 of the Europa League as Heinrich Mkhitaryan scores his first goal for the club to set up a 2-0 win over Zorya Luhansk. Now, all this and more we've got for you later on in the Sports Bulletin, but all this at 10:40. For now, Elvis has got the news for you.
Yeah, thank you, Kendall. Top story this morning. The Castle of Good Hope is holding a national tribute in honor of 3 indigenous warrior kings, Their Majesties King Kachaya Kenseng Kankona of the Amazulu, as well as King Langalebele of the Matembu of the Amashlubi, King Sekokune of Bapedi, and the Khoisan freedom fighter and coup leader, Doman. all of whom at different times different time periods rather, were captured and incarcerated at the castle after having led various wars of resistance against the land and castle dispossessions that ensued following the arrival of the Dutch and later the British settlers in South Africa. Nomaweto Sowandle joins us now to tell us more what we can expect at the castle today. Very good morning to you and welcome.
Well, a very good morning to you indeed. We are coming to you live from the Castle of Good Hope down here in Cape Town, one of the oldest existing colonial buildings in South Africa. Now, this building has been the center of civilian, of political, of military life since the 1600s. So when you talk about the Castle of Good Hope, you talk about a lot of things, and it means different things to different people. But really, in essence, the Castle of Good Hope is a reminder of Cape Town's colonial past. Now, when you speak about the Cape's colonial past, you can't leave out people like the king of the Zulu kingdom, King Cetshwayo, or the king of Amahlubi, of the Hlubi, that is Langalibalele Dube. So those are some of the indigenous king warriors that will also be honored a little bit later on here this morning. You'll remember that we're coming to you live from the Castle of Good Hope, where we are commemorating 350 years of the existence of this building. Well, things are set to start down here at around 9:30. We've seen people arriving. We know that the Minister of Defense and Military Veterans, Ms. Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula, will be here. We know that the President is unable to make it, but things seem to be going very smoothly. So we'll keep you updated as things unfold down here at the Castle of Good Hope. For now, it's back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Nomaweto. She'll update us on the happenings there, so you have to stay tuned. We'll bring you live pictures from there in a short while. Now, in other news, South Africa and Zambia had vowed to review all 21 bilateral agreements between them to ensure that they mutually benefit their citizens. The launch of the Joint Commission for Cooperation will oversee the implementation of the agreements. President Jacob Zuma and Edgar Lungu met at the Union Buildings in Pretoria yesterday. Lungu's state visit is seen as a deepening friendship between the two countries. Bilateral agreements have been signed around trade and investment, science and technology, agriculture, defense, energy and culture. President Jacob Zuma used the occasion to urge business people from both countries to take advantage of the sound political relations between their countries. President Lungu also addressed the South Africa-Zambia Business Forum and received a courtesy call from the Deputy President, Cyril Ramaphosa. Former acting CEO Phil Molefe is expected to testify before the parliamentary inquiry into the SABC today. Molefe is one of 3 witnesses scheduled to appear before the ad hoc committee. They are all expected to give evidence on governance issues at the SABC. Yesterday, 2 former SABC board members and a former CEO told the SABC inquiry of consistent deep divisions in the leadership of the corporation. They also detailed how Hlaudi Motsoeneng appeared to have strong political links in running the public broadcaster, often to the detriment of his superiors. All 3 witnesses say they always tried to correct matters, but their concerns were ignored. The role of Communications Minister Faith Mutambi also came under the spotlight in the appointment of Motsoeneng as the permanent COO. The committee meanwhile said it would issue a summons to the SABC board chairperson, Mbulaheni Magube, after he failed to arrive to give testimony. He has described the inquiry as biased and wants to challenge it in court. The summons will call on Magube to appear before the committee on Tuesday. Commemorating the 16 days of activism against women and child abuse campaign, fathers living in the Beacon Valley in Mitchell's Plain on the Cape Flats have joined forces to take action. They are taking a stand against the abuse of women and children.
Fathers taking the time to show their support and love for their daughters. The aim? To raise awareness and exchange views on how to strengthen the role of men and fathers in the troubled area of Mitchell's Plain, where violence is of great concern for authorities. The young woman in attendance called on men for more respect and protection.
I think the concerns are mostly that the fathers in the community should make the daughters and anyone feel safe and needed and respected in the communities.
fathers also weighed in on the matter.
If we are more visible in the area and show the community that we are a part of it and not being excluded, then we can also do our part as fathers in the area, and not just be the person that they see that we are the abusers, but we can be part of the solution.
Western Cape Social Development MEC Albert Fritz says it's important to have such sessions in an area like Mitchell's Plain, where abuse of women and children is rife. Carmel Lochmerk-Roberts, SABC News, Mitchell's Plain on the Cape Flats.
The two men accused of attacking and forcing victim Shlotswa into a coffin in Middelburg and in Mpumalanga have been denied bail. The court said that Willem Oosthuizen and Theo Jackson's actions were clearly racially motivated. The duo faced charges of assault to cause grievous bodily harm after they assaulted Mo Shlotswa and forced him into a coffin alive. The magistrate described the act as barbaric. He added that the case had to be used to send a strong message that racism will not be tolerated in the country. The case will be back in court again on January the 25th. So, let's now go to Eben to take this discussion further.
Yeah, Elvis, thank you very much. Of course, we're asking an interesting question around the decolonization of our history books a little bit, because we have this, we have this interesting national tribute happening in a short while. We'll be live there shortly, but of course the question we're putting on screen is very much around the decolonization of our history books. Should South Africa's history books be rewritten is what we ask you. Also, we're running a poll. Let's just have a look at that poll if we have it up. We're asking, on the poll we go on further, should South Africa's history books be decolonized is what we ask of you. We've got almost 100 votes on there. 2/3 of you are saying, yes, let's decolonize our history books. Now, let's go back to the castle of Good Hope now in Cape Town, where Nomawethu Solwandle is, I think, with His Royal Highness Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. Very good morning to you, Nomawethu. I understand you're ready. Just go ahead and tell us what's going on now.
A very good morning to you once again, Eben, and welcome back to the Castle of Good Hope. Well, earlier on, I spoke to the Deputy Minister of Defence and Military Veterans, and basically what he was telling me is that today we will be rewriting history. Earlier on, I also spoke about how the castle means different things for different people. But for a lot of indigenous groups, such as the Zulu people, such as the Khoisan, this is a very sad space for them, because they were dispossessed by a lot of things. That includes land, that includes livestock, and people have gone as far as saying dignity. But to tell us more about the importance of this commemoration, we are now joined by Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi to tell us more. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
Just what does today mean? You know, we talk about rewriting history and talking about the dignity of people. What does this day mean to you?
I think for us it's a very important day and also very sad in a way, because we are commemorating the kings that were actually imprisoned here in the 19th century, who include my great-grandfather, King Cetshwayo, and the king of the Mashubi, King Langalbalele, and the king of the Pedis, King Sekhukhune. So for us, it's a very sad day, but at the same time, we are very grateful that they are being remembered and honored, because those are the first people who were fighting for our liberation, because it's often forgotten as if the liberation struggle started just with our movements in the 20th century, whereas in fact it had been going on for a long time with the Khoisan people, for instance, here, who were dispossessed first of all here, and further when other nations were also dispossessed and attacked, you know, in wars. We fought wars which we didn't want, but which were actually waged in order to dispossess us.
Just when we look at the situation, how has colonization impacted on the lives of indigenous people?
Well, actually, it has been a great long road that we've traveled, you know, until 1994, of course, when our freedom was restored. But nevertheless, because of what happened, there are still there's still a lot of things that need to be done about restoration of land, for instance, because our people still feel that their freedom is not complete because they are actually not yet in possession of their land.
Now, we speak about educating, we speak about living in memory, but how do we ensure that people learn more about these things to know our history?
Well, I think events like today's is a good example of how our people should be reminded of their history and of how the younger generation should actually be made aware of the long struggle that took place and what it has cost us over centuries to get where we are.
Thank you very much for your time. Well, that was Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi telling us more about the importance of today and what it means to different people. He says there's a lot of sadness, but at the same time, a lot of letting go. People need to be reminded about where they come from and where we're going. For now, it's back to you in the studio, Eben.
Yeah, thank you very much, Noma Weto Solwandle. Coming to you from a wet and rainy Cape Town in the middle of summer there. It's quite unusual. Cape Townians have been praying for rain, though, the last couple of weeks. They finally found it. It coincides with this auspicious event. Of course, we've been asking you the question on screen. Should our history books be rewritten on the back of the stories of, well, our fight against, against colonialism? Let's take a look at some of your tweets. Lechasa talks about, morning, Mr. Evan. Thank you, Elvis and Kendall. Yes, South Africa's history books should be rewritten, but excluding apartheid years, says Lechasa Butler Moyo. Then Shafana Zulu Show says, yes, because there's a lot of things that are needed to be written as new history in our country. Yes, and even some of our old history needs to be, well, updated or made more accurate in case. So those are some of your tweets that we are talking about with regard to the story. For more on the British invasion of the Zulu Kingdom, well, it happened on the 22nd of January 1879 at Isandlwana, and what we can expect from today's national tribute in honor of the three indigenous kings, as well as the Khoisan leader Doman. We are now joined from our Durban studios by Brian van Schaik, who is from Ukolo Bush and Battlefield. Brian, a very good morning to you, and thank you for being with us here on Newsroom.
Good morning, Elvis. Thank you, man.
It's Eben, actually, Brian. Elvis is the other one. He's sitting over there. I know we kind of sound and look alike, man. Just quickly, give us you've studied all the battlefield regions, and you're an historian and an expert on what happened. Just tell us about the British invasion of the Zulu Kingdom as a starting point.
Yeah, basically the British invasion of the Zulu Kingdom could be said to have started from, well, basically with the annexation of the Cape, heading all the way through to basically the annexation of Natal, and then also of the Transvaal in 1877. Basically, with this, you'll find out that the British colony, when they annexed Natal, they annexed her with all her problems. The problems being such as this history between the Boers and your Zulus, which range back to about 1838, with basically the Boer-Zulu War, where you'll find out Piet Retief and his men were executed on their way making it to Nkosi Dingaan to try and basically establish new lands in the area of Natal. With basically the annexation of this, you'll find out that the British colony didn't want, didn't want this issue of the Zulus. And what we mean by this is basically the issue of the Zulus relating straight to the fact that, they're causing problems for the colonies, such as they'll be harassing engineers moving in and out, they'll be harassing the colonials, they'll be stealing livestock, and it actually interfered with this whole idea of confederation, the confederation of the states. Confederation of the states basically being the point of, well, basically we want the land and we need the money from the land because our kitties are running dry. And this is where we head towards Natal itself. And the man who's basically spearheading all of this was a gentleman by the name of Lord Carnarvon, who was the colonial secretary over in England. And he put that onto Sir Bartle Frere, who was basically the High Commissioner of South Africa at the time. And Frere, anything that basically stood in Frere's way was a case of we had to do something about it, and the Zulus was that question mark. And this is where it leads us to Nkosi Chitswaya Kapandi, who basically at this point was becoming a bit of a headache to the colony, because all he did was he didn't really want to trade. He kicked the missionaries out, and the colony wasn't too impressed about this, you could imagine.
Yeah.
And in response to this, he sets up this man, Sir Balton Frere, sets up a border commission in 1878 to answer the question of the Zulus. And this eventually leads us to what we find the ultimatum being handed over on the 11th of December, 1878. To give you an idea of this ultimatum, the ultimatum was basically a document stating that the Zulus are to give up their Amabutu age grade regiments. They are to have mission stations placed outside every single Umuzi and Ikanda. And at the end of the day, they must give up their way of life. And on top of it, Chitswaya was told to hand over his nephews, who were Siao's sons. And this basically was the crux of it all, where you even find out Ndunas from Chitswaya's close-knit community would have actually said to him, would have said to these colonists, at the end of the day, are we going to burn the Zulu nation because of a couple of ladies who ran away?
Tell us about...
That's basically what led to this invasion.
Tell us about today's celebration, the national tribute we're seeing at the Castle of Good Hope. Of course, you spoke about the role of King Cetshwayo, but what about King Langalibalele, King Sekhukhune of the north of the Bapedi? And then I'm interested about the Khoisan leader, Doman, who will also be part of today's tribute.
Yeah, basically with these gentlemen, it was a case of when when the colonies took over the Cape, you would have found out you set with a situation when it came to you could call it the local kingdoms. What it is that when you have these when you do colonize a state, it's a case of you gotta take her on with all of her natives. Okay, we've got to resolve the question of the natives. And then how we do that is basically, we put our own policies into place. And with that, we also got to hinder the movement of these natives. So how they do it is basically, they'll bring a force in. That force will come. That force will establish sort of communications throughout the land. And the way we do that is, obviously we attack the locals. But on top of it, we also need resources. How do we get the resources? Well, you have to attack the local kingdoms, and that's where it comes in with your Sotho tribes, your Khoisans, etc. These guys were inhibiting that movement of colonization, which is why you would have found out that these men were eventually heroes of their people, as they managed to actually hold back the forces, maybe once every now and again for like a month or so, but still they managed to hold back one of the strongest forces in the world at the time. And with that, that's where you find out that these kings were the heroes that they're made to be.
Brian,
with myself,
these kings, they're still heroes today. I wanted to ask you, we're asking our viewers a question, and you're probably most qualified to answer this question because you are a historian. We're asking our viewers, should South Africa's history books be decolonized? How do you answer that?
At the end of the day, it depends on the books, because I mean, like, you'll find out a lot of the new literature that is coming through now. It's taking both sides of the story. When it comes to decolonization of books, you've got to be very specific on what books that we are looking at when it comes to that. With myself, the only way that I covered my studies, the only way I actually did what I did, was I took both ends of the story. And with taking both ends of the story, it does come down to that question of, should we decolonize the books? And a lot of the books that I'll say were pre-1990, maybe yes. Yeah, a lot of those books are outdated. And there's a lot of new stuff that's come through, especially with the War Office in England releasing classified documentation. We also have stories being passed verbally down the lines basically through the ages. So like a lot of the things that we're finding out are through verbal communication with locals from the areas. Like myself, I specialize mainly in the KwaZulu-Natal region, the KwaZulu-Natal battlefields. And with that, I'll spend basically, you can call it 60% of my time, well, 50 to 60% of my time, speaking to the locals, asking their side of the story, as opposed to just reading out of a book where we've collected from basically information from 19 whatever.
Yeah.
And that's where that's where the decolonization does come in, yes. But I also think that it's up to our people, the people on the ground as well, to actually become more educated in this, all right? Show them the importance of these battlefields and how it can help us as a community. And yeah, with that, this is where you can say the decolonization of books is appropriate, but we also need to look at the factor of where do you draw that fine line on this?
Yeah, it is a balance. It's a balancing act at the end of the day, Brian. You're spot on there. But I know you're an expert in Cape, not in Cape, in KwaZulu-Natal, but everybody knows about, of course, the role of the Castle of Good Hope within the colonization of Southern Africa and it being the oldest building. Today it celebrates, not today, well, this year it's celebrating 350 years, the Castle of Good Hope, and this is part of that celebration we're seeing now. How do you view the Castle of Good Hope and historical context with that it kind of carries with it? How should we view it today?
We should view it as the start of our judicial system in South Africa. I mean, when it was, the initial idea of the castle itself was basically to be a place of jurisdictional rule. And that's how basically you'll find out most of the laws came in South Africa was through what was initiated in the castle itself. With that as well, you'll find out, yes, it was eventually turned into basically a prison of sorts, and also where the High Commissioner stayed. But it holds a high value to that regard, and the fact that our laws wouldn't be what it is today if it wasn't for the emplacement of where that building was placed and how they ran the court systems from there. Because you'll find out, even though it was, a lot of the laws were seen as one-sided to support only the colonies, it was also seen to also be in support of the natives, because there was uproars. Whenever somebody in the colony did something wrong towards the native community, it was taken to these courts, it was approached, and people did respond to it, and people did lose their positions within government areas, within the colony itself, within the colonies itself. But yeah, it holds high regard in our nation's history at the end of the day, as because of what it stands for. It stands for basically everything up until the struggle that the struggle ending in 1994, up until today, where we look at where we stand as South Africans, where we are more united. We've got one of the best judicial systems in the world, and it all leads down to the implementations that were made with.
Thank you for joining us, Brian. Brian van Schaik. He's from Ukolo Bush and Battlefield in KwaZulu-Natal. He's a historian, and of course, we're dealing with 350 years of the Castle of Good Hope today also. As you saw there on screen, the invasion of the Zulu kingdom by the British and how it all played out and how it's all been told in our history books. Let's just take a look what you guys are talking about on Facebook. Now, Tebza Rao, he says, of course, South African history was written by settlers for settlers, says Tebza. Then Sihle Ngwenya says, on the question, should we decolonize our history book, says that would be the greatest thing ever, with a tear and a clap clap. Lovely. This one from Samurai. He says, Newsroom, yes, and tell the full stories correctly. Our youth need to know who they are, not what they went through. Interesting one there. Aubrey says, Newsroom, yes, it should be rewritten, and a lot of things need to be written in this country for the next generations to come. Yes, you don't know where you're going. You will never know where you're going if you don't know where you come from. Muli says, yes, decolonize our history books, but who's going to rewrite our history, because even our own African culture is written by foreigners? That cannot be true. Then Unati Grootboom, he says, yes, they should be rewritten for generations to come and get their chance to read our history. Talking about the Castle of Good Hope, of course. Thank you to Unati there. All our regular contributors, the training down in the mother city. Yes, that's what they called it. The mother city, because that's where civilization started. Never mind the fact that we had civilization here for thousands and thousands of years. But let's go down to the Castle of Good Hope for today's proceedings.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the arrival of the Minister of Defence and Military Veterans. Ladies and gentlemen, you may be seated. Chaplain General, Brigadier General M.A. Jamangile will lead us in scripture reading and prayer.
We read from the book of Proverbs, Incwadi yemizekeliso. It reads thus: never remove an old landmark that your ancestors established. This proverb speaks to God's sense of justice. In order for us to get where we want to be, it is of utmost importance to know where we are coming from. This brings us to the fundamental point that we do not have the right to forget what God remembers. We are gathered here today to remember and to pay homage and to honor the legacy of 4 remarkable South African warriors who left indelible footprints in their wake as they passed through life in our country. God himself vows that them that honor me, I will honor them. We thank God today that their deeds of selfless devotion are the golden thread that binds for all time the story of South African nation. In conclusion, these landmarks enable us to recall who God is, who we as people are, and therefore what we should do and be as God's people. Let us not be guilty of missing the opportunity to be a blessing to the world. May God of our ancestors bless the Minister of Defense and military veterans and the nation as we become catalysts for change. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Let us pray. I now commend this special occasion unto your throne of grace. May the people of God say amen.
The Minister of Defence and Military Veterans is now requested to proceed with the unveiling of the statues.
Kgosikgolo Sekhukhune II is requested to accompany the Minister of Defence and Military Veterans. King Sekhukhune, born 1814, passed on 1882. The Bapedi nation, led by King Sekwati Sekhukhune's father, stood in the way of the ambition of Voortrekkers to establish a Boer republic in the Transvaal in the mid-1800s. The attack on Thaba Mosega, the capital of the Bapedi nation, 1852, was the first of many to follow that were repulsed. King Sekwati died in 1861 and was succeeded by King Sekhukhune, who immediately established a reputation of being a formidable military figure. The Boers failed to subjugate the Bapedi nation. The British set their sight on the annexation of the Transvaal Boer Republic, which they did in 1877. The priority of the British was to defeat King Sekhukhune. This they eventually managed to do in 1879 when they assembled a strong force supported by over 10,000 Swazi fighters and European fortune hunters. After his defeat in Thaba Mosega, the Bapedi king was captured and briefly held at the Castle of Good Hope before being taken to Pretoria. In 1881, he was freed but not allowed to return to Thaba Mosega. The king settled in Monoge, where he was assassinated by his half-brother Mampuru on 13th August 1882. Minister of Defense and Military Veterans is requested to do the unveiling. King Muziwenkosi Khatebe Kalanga Libalele is requested to accompany the Minister of Defense and Military Veterans. King Langalibalele, born 1814, passed on 1889. King Langalibalele ascended to the throne of the Amahlubi nation in 1836, when Boers and later the British made a push to colonize land to the east and north of the Cape Colony. The Amahlubi nation was based in the Escort area of KwaZulu-Natal. It became one of the obstacles to the territorial ambitions of both the British and the Boers. The discovery of diamonds in Kimberley in 1861 gave young Mhlubi men an opportunity to work in the mines. Guns were given to some of them as a form of remuneration. The British colonialists who had established a strong foothold in Natal found this unacceptable. After King Langalibalele refused to hand over guns to the British, a warrant of arrest was issued. He was arrested in 1837 and tried for murder, treason, and rebellion. The king was imprisoned in Robben Island after a short detention at the Castle of Good Hope. He was later detained at Uitvlugt near Pinelands in the Cape for 12 years. In 1887, he was returned to Natal, where he died 2 years later. In a tribute to the king, the township of Kwalanga in Cape Town was named after him in 1923. The Minister of Defense and Military Veterans is requested to do the unveiling. Chief Basil Kutsie is requested to accompany the Minister of Defense and Military Veterans. Domen of Goring, Haika, born circa 1617, passed on 1663. Domen is a Khoi man of Korokwakwatlen who was initially employed by the Dutch East India Company as an interpreter. In 1657, he was sent to Batavia, now Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, to continue his work as an interpreter. It was while in Batavia that Domen resolved that he would fight against Dutch settlers upon his return to the Cape Peninsula. His attack on settlers in 1659 led to the First Khoi-Dutch War. Domen was seriously wounded and died in 1663, much to the relief of the then governor of the Cape Colony, Zachariah Wagenaar. Although he was never detained at Castle of Good Hope, Domen's military exploits were carried out in close proximity to the fortress. He is deservedly regarded as the first freedom fighter against European settlers in South Africa. The Minister of Defense and Military Veterans is requested to do the unveiling. Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi is requested to accompany the Minister of Defense and Military Veterans. King Kashwayo Zulu, born 1826, passed on 1884. In 1874, Qetshwayo Zulu, who succeeded his father Mpande as king of the Zulu nation, was widely accredited with restoring the military might of his people following a decline that set in after the assassination of King Shaka in 1828. The British, who colonized Natal in the middle of 19th century, sought to build a confederation of southern African states. A major obstacle to this imperial design was the Zulu kingdom. King Qetshwayo Zulu refused to bow to the pressure by Britain to disarm his troops as a prelude to the annexation of Zulu territory. This led in January 1879 to the historic Battle of Isandlwana, in which King Qetshwayo Zulu's forces defeated the British. 6 months later, at the Battle of Ulundi, the British amassed a military force that defeated the Zulu army. This led to King Qetshwayo Zulu's capture and incarceration at the Castle of Good Hope. Later, he was transferred to Oudemolen on a farm where the Cape Flats are today. After a trip to England to meet the British monarch in 1882, King Qetshwayo Zulu was granted his demand for the restoration of the Zulu kingdom. The restoration was, however, granted on conditions that diminished the power of the Zulu nation. The king died in February 1884. The Minister of Defense and Military Veterans is requested to do the unveiling.
umtshezi isiguqa sikandaba esivulela ngamahlamvu endonda kusuka lapha phezu kothukela lomsindo lapha kontilingwe kazingwani bangobasentengweni bana bakwakhinya bayaxokozela baxokozelela indlondlo yako katshana bathi kuyabe kundlondloni lengabhula amaphiko ngoba zonke izindlondlo ehobhula amaphiko abayozingeliswe yalasenhlungwaneni ambumbuluzo amavakasandlodlweni ewasengwegweni abalakabhangazela ikhabe limile lodwa ebangasenhlungwane amanye amakhabe emiliqeqelekhu thambekeka ebuyamntakandaba thambekeka mfazi walwayo uyawuthambekeka wawusintambanana nangesinyembezi namhla uyawudabula kwaba kwangqangaza bafazi bakwangqangaza balala ezibayeni babenjengamathole ubekeza amatholana namhlaza lapho athi dabule umlaba abazalokhwani wafika umnyanda emkhoto wathi mntakandaba usubahlabe nasemehlweni inyathi kandaba empondo zimakhenkenene bazimana amaphandle emkhoto bathi umhlathuze kasekuwela bathi zokuwela silo ngamakhanda bakwamadoda izulu elidume phezu kwesandlwana umona uhlaba amankamana ududlu ukhahlamba isiganyane esikampande sigenye abantu sekenza inkomo impuzi kandaba bama bangadlebende phezu kwalangazana yadlabuluka yadla amadoda umthunduluko ovuthendula inde kwathi iqoza yalabalabela udlu nomsimekwana etalobikwayo wamshaya phansi kwaludumayo kwabantu abazitho mashaya ishukule salangisiphingo wamshaya phansi kwaludumayo kwabantu abazitho ubhane phasi napolieli kwabasefransi wamshaya phansi kwaludumayo kwaze kwabantu abazalutho wena wandlovu wena wandlovu wethe.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the unveiling. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your positions. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your positions. The Minister of Defence and Military Veterans is requested to deliver her address.
Program Director,
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
Program Director, the Speaker of the National Assembly, Deputy Minister of Defense and Military Veterans, Ministers and Deputy Ministers, representatives of the National House of Traditional Leaders, Royal Houses. I recognize the delegation from the Zulu Royal House led by Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, the traditional Prime Minister, so tasked to represent the House on behalf of Isilo Samabandla, King's Goodwill Zwelithini. I'm particularly elated that Dr. Buthelezi is one of our political elders and a former elder council and colleague of mine personally. I'm excited that he accepted the invitation and the task to lead the delegation. I also recognize the delegation of the Bapedi Royal House as led by Kgoshikgolo Sekhukhune, the Hlubi Royal Delegation led by Inkosi Langalibalele, as well as the delegation representing the Khoi Royal House led by Chief Basil Kutsie, the Secretary of Defense, the Acting Director General of the Department of Military Veterans, the Chief of the South African National Defence Force, represented by Gerald Masondo, members of the Military Command, senior government officials, distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me first and foremost to extend the most sincere apology on behalf of our Commander-in-Chief, President Jacob Zuma, who, as a result of the change in the program of the state visit by President Lungu of Zambia, is no longer able to be the chief functionary at this commemoration and parade. The President has expressed his deepest regret for not being at this event, which has been key on his calendar. And he requested me specifically to extend his apology to his guests, including His Majesties from various royal houses present here today. I therefore today address you, not in my own capacity as Minister of Defense, but I represent the President's address to you on his behalf. Program Director, this week, on Monday, the 5th of December, South Africans of all walks of life once again observed with a mixture of gratitude and great sadness the 3rd anniversary of the passing of our beloved father, Madiba Nelson Mandela, 3 years ago. President Mandela is celebrated as a true symbol for our quest to heal our nation of its divisive past, to correct the injustices that divided and sought to destroy our nation. and to collectively advance towards a common future for us all. Nelson Mandela urged us in this regard to not reject our past, however bad it could be, but to embrace it, learn from it, and most importantly, correct it, and to vow never to allow our country to return to it. Speaking in Parliament on the occasion to commemorate 10 years of our democracy in South Africa, he emphasized this imperative when he said, and I quote, "Let us never be mindful of the terrible past from which we come, using that memory not as a means to keep us shackled to the past in a negative manner, but rather as a joyous reminder of how far we have come and how much we have achieved," close quote. The Castle of Good Hope, a historic edifice in the heart of Cape Town's Central Business District, can be described as a symbol of the beginning of an era that set our country on a destructive path of colonial injustice and racial oppression. A standing reminder and sanctuary for the defense of a brutal system that robbed the majority of South Africans of their dignity, social identity, land, and other benefits of their country's economic potential. It is this and many symbols of the past from which we have come that Nelson Mandela reminds us to keep as a reminder, a lesson and a warning never to return our country to an era they represented. So today, as part of this quest to learn and to remember, we commemorate the 350th anniversary of the building of this place as the first building of modern Western architecture in our country. When the foundation stone was laid in August 1666 by the then governor of the Cape Colony, Zachariah Wagenaar, the intention was to build a solid defense against two main enemies, rival European powers who could attack from the sea and the indigenous population who fought to retain their land and freedom. The castle, whose construction began on the 2nd of January 1966, was more than just a military fortress. As the Dutch settlers and later the British used the Cape Peninsula as a springboard to conquer the inland, the castle became the political, judicial, legislative, penal, and social nerve center of the fledgling colonial administration. It was also the residence of the governor from 1679 until the British took control of the castle in 1795. It served as military headquarters for the British until it was handed over to the government of the Union of South Africa in 1917. The Castle of Good Hope, therefore, officially turned 350 years old in January this year. It is our country's oldest building, and its age, content, adaptive to reuse, and ongoing historical significance is indeed a major milestone in the life of our young democracy. In recognition thereof, the Ministry of Defense and Military Veterans ordered a refurbishment and restoration program of 108 million rands that started early in 2015, and as you can see, left us a castle that is beautiful, accessible, and user-friendly. In fact, for the first time in the history of the castle, we have now complete universal access. We've installed 2 passenger lifts, the first in 350 years. We have installed ramps and have changed the interpretive system of the castle for the better. The original builders of the castle were craftsmen from many European countries, working side by side with Khoi, African, and Eastern slave laborers. Historically, the castle was the center around which Cape Town and South Africa developed. almost every South African alive today has in one way or another been affected by historical decisions made and executed at this castle. Although the historic and architectural significance of the castle is widely documented, the Citadel took a back seat in comparison with Robben Island, Freedom Park, Cradle of Humankind, and many other heritage sites during the first 2 decades of South Africa's democracy. This is a bit of a historical anomaly, given the fact that for at least 2 centuries, this castle served as the center for all economic, military, political, and cultural life in the Cape Colony, and indeed the entire Southern African region. The castle housed the first formal seat of government until 1811. This is in fact the room behind me here, which fulfilled its role as military headquarters from 1674 till the late 1990s. It served as a prison for high-profile historical figures such as King Cetshwayo, Adam Tas, Adam Kok I, King Sekhukhune, and King Langalibalele, and was the birthplace of the South African Navy, amongst many others. No wonder that the Pentagon shape was chosen in 1957 as the symbol for the old South African Defence Force. The first armed resistance the Dutch settlers faced was from the indigenous inhabitants of the Cape Peninsula, the Khoi and the San. 3 Khoi Dutch wars were fought in 1659, 1673, and 1674. Like wars against other indigenous groups which were fought later when European settlers started trekking to the eastern and northern inland in search of the more land and treasure. The colonialists ultimately triumphed through a combination of superior firepower and the alliances they formed with some indigenous people. Today, we are honoring 3 indigenous warrior kings and gallant heroes and heroines who literally took on the might of colonial armies. King Cetshwayo, King Langalibalele, King Sekhukhune, and Chief Domen. The statues that you see in front of you is the tangible recognition of these and thousands of other unsung heroes and heroines of colonial wars of resistance. It is the beginning of an ongoing commitment to honor all those who gallantly fought against colonial quest and in turn inspired future generations of freedom fighters. But that is not all. We are also opening the first ever Center for Memory, Healing, and Learning. The symbol behind this is huge in recognition of what took place here. The flanks of the center houses 2 very harrowing spaces. The one is called torture chamber, and I don't have to explain to you why. The other is the jail cells in which were incarcerated the kings and chiefs we are honoring here today. The center, sponsored by the Department of Military Veterans, is breaking the curse of oppression, persecution, and ignorance. I understand that this is going to be a seminar room where topics on colonialization, restitution, healing, and heritage will be debated and discussed and taught. I would really encourage all government departments to make use of this facility. Since the castle essentially served as a haven for colonial rulers and was a strong proponent of slavery, it is perhaps no accident that the largest contradiction and conflict around identity and race is to be found in the Western Cape, and in particular Cape Town. We must use this opportunity to change the mindset of the castle being glorified as a bastion of colonialism. It is against this background that the commemoration of the 350 years existence of the castle offers us a unique opportunity to revisit, reinterpret, rewrite our complex brutal colonial and apartheid history in a manner that is fully inclusive, restorative, respectful, and educational. As with all events like these, the decision to commemorate was not taken lightly. That is why we dedicated not to call this a celebration, but rather a commemoration. We need to embrace our collective history and heritage, whether it is good, bad, or ugly. The 350th mark offers us a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to rewrite our colonial history in a manner that is inclusive and enhance healing and nation building. And it must start with the primary education children, all of whom must be taught about the history of the castle in their current history books. This 12-month commemorative program of the castle, which we are concluding today, was launched by the ministry on the 2nd of January 2016 with the original cornerstone unveiling, witnessed by over 700 invited guests, reflecting on what happened 350 years ago. One of the strong pillars on which the new democracy in South Africa is built is national reconciliation. Whilst recognizing the many horrors associated with the castle, its place in the history of the country cannot be denied. We've resolved to transform the castle from what it used to stand for then to a place of nation building and reconciliation now and for the future. The bastion of colonialism must, through a balanced interpretation of history, become a center of healing and learning. It is of critical importance that young South Africans study the true history of the castle and from lessons learned be part of efforts to achieve the overarching objective to heal and reconcile this nation. A study of the history of the castle, which is so interwoven with that of events leading to the creation of the Union of South Africa in 1910 and beyond, we also enrich scholarship in institutions of higher learning. Our history of war and conflict, including that of our king, warriors, and generals, lays the basis that informs our lessons and experiences of the past as a nation, helping us to forge a common identity, a common future and destiny. During this year, working with the Department of Arts and Culture, we've put emphasis on giving practical expression to our decision to reorganize, preserve, and celebrate our military heritage as an integral part of building our new society. This decision included the various commemorations both here at home and internationally, including the memorial of the sinking of Mendi, which serves as the official Armed Forces Day for the SANDF, as well as our recent visit to Aqua-Badla in France to honor many South African soldiers who fell there during World War I. The Department of Defense and the Castle Control Board decided to commemorate 350 years of the castle under the theme, Freedom from Oppression. Freedom from Oppression. From the 2nd of January 2016, when the beginning of the construction of the castle was commemorated, right up to today's final event, many activities involving learners, youths, women, artists, cultural groups were held. One of the highlights of the commemoration was in August 2016, when we honored and held a ceremonial repatriation of the spirit of Mama Krotoa, a Khoi woman who worked for Jan van Riebeeck from the Grotekerk in Cape Town city center to the castle where she was originally buried. All these events were guided by our expressed determination that the 350 years of the castle be commemorated in a conciliatory and inclusive manner. Today, therefore, in the context of a democratic South Africa, the Castle of Good Hope, historically associated with the fundamental ills of our colonial past, is now being transformed into that which represents the values that underpin the new democratic dispensation. This including event of the Castle of the Good Hope commemoration is but one small step in rewriting our history in an inclusive and respectful manner that fosters nation building, healing, and reconciliation. The castle has now been declared a National Heritage Site and will soon apply to UNESCO to be upgraded to a World Heritage Site. This recognition and enhanced status will enable the Castle of Good Hope to make its contribution to efforts to educate, heal, and reconcile South Africa's diverse population and attract visitors, both local and international, to come to the castle and learn more about this site. This will further enhance our tourism whilst educating our people. From oppression, colonialism, to freedom, I thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the final compliments.
There you have it live from the Castle of Good Hope. That, of course, the tribute to the three warriors, the three warrior kings, and of course a Khoisan warrior being paid tribute to by the minister, and of course full honours there. Rewriting our history as we speak today, and that's why we're asking you that question. Do you think that as South Africa that we should rewrite our history books, or should they be rewritten? That's the question that we pose to you. You can let us know on the Twitter handle as well as on the Facebook page. So what are you saying, Evan?
Well, the people on social media are telling us, show us the SABC inquiry, Elvis. That's what they're saying. That's not all of it. We'll be going to the SABC inquiry shortly. But let's just take a look at some of the tweets coming in with regards to our question of the day. Of course, our history, and should we decolonize our history a little bit? Black Star says, Newsroom, where is Mshweshwe in all this history? Are you saying the Sotho's never played any significant role in South African history? No, these were simply the leaders and the kings that were incarcerated at the castle. Black Star says he showed more resistance and was driven out of the Free State. Yes, these are the kings that were incarcerated at the castle. Tandeka in Ntlantla says, Newsroom, yes, sir, they should be, but apartheid should be excluded for obvious reasons. Skumbuzo says, yes, a history that is distorted can't be informing, and its desired purpose is to mislead. The current history is flawed. Samurai says, Newsroom, yes, and tell the full stories correctly. Our youth need to know who they are, not what they went through. Now, the last one, it's done. As you can see, our inquiry, SABC inquiry is underway. Should be an interesting day in Parliament. Let's go straight to matters that's underway.
State your full names. Krishnaidu. You give the committee your academic background, please.
Well, I'm an admitted attorney, acting as a consultant now to the ANC. And I also hold a master's degrees in strategic studies.
You were until very recently a non-executive board member of the South African Broadcasting Corporation, is that correct?
That's correct.
I'm in possession of a statement, and I have placed it before you as well, a copy of same, dated the 8th of December.
That's correct, Chair. That is a statement that I've written out and submitted to the committee yesterday.
Okay. Can you I see in your statement you deal with 5 issues. You deal with the board's legal incapacity to discharge its duties and taking binding decisions. You deal with the board's abdication of responsibility and management usurpation of the board's responsibility. The third issue dealing with is the unlawful removal of the 3 non-executive board members. The fourth point you deal with in your statement are the attempts by the minister, or the alleged attempts by the minister, the board to remove you as a member. The last one, the contract between the SABC and MultiChoice, correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Can you take the committee then through your presentation around these 5 issues?
Thank you very much. Chairman, I was a non-executive board member between September 2013 and October 2016. In that time, I was also a member of the Audit, Social and Ethics, Risk and Finance, Investment, Procurement and Technology Board subcommittees. I was also deployed by the board to be a trustee of the SABC Medical Schemes Board. Following my consultation in Johannesburg in October 2016 with Advocate Vanara, the evidence leader, at the inquiry, and the subsequent resignation of all non-executive board members bar 1, I wish to adduce evidence on the following matters under oath, which I've taken. 1, board's legal incapacity to discharge its duties and take binding decisions. In terms of the South African Broadcasting Act 4 of 1999, a quorum of 9 members is required to transact business on behalf of the corporation. At the moment, the SABC board has 1 non-executive board member and 3 executive board members who perform their duties in acting capacities. Based on the above, it is apparent that the board does not have the legal capacity to discharge its fiduciary duties, adhere to the board charter and control the affairs of the corporation and carry out its duties as contemplated in terms of Section 13, subsection 11 of the Act. That's the SABC Act. On this legal interpretation alone, absent a long drawn-out inquiry, I hold the view that the National Assembly may invoke the provisions of Section 15, capital A, subsection 1, subsection B of the Act, and recommend the dissolution of the board because the board is not in a position to discharge its fiduciary duties, adhere to the charter, and control the affairs of the corporation due to legal incapacity. Point 2, board's abdication of responsibility and management's usurpation of board responsibility. Generally, the dysfunctionality of a board can arise from one of 2 sources, Chairman. The abdication of a board of its responsibility or the usurpation by management of the board's responsibility. Abdication occurs where board members, out of laziness, tardiness, or other reason, neglect their fiduciary duties and substantially allow management to run the corporation. Usurpation occurs where management takes over responsibilities which properly lie within the domain of the board. In both instances, good corporate governance suffers. In the SABC, we had a curious cocktail of both abdication and usurpation brought about by an immoral and clandestine relationship between some non-executive board members and executive board members, and which was managed by a simple majority. This immoral relationship led to the creation of 2 groups at board level. One which was concerned with discharging their fiduciary duties, and the other which was intent on achieving certain outcomes which are not necessarily in the best interest of the corporation. This unhealthy relationship placed Mr. Hlaudi Motsoeneng as a ringmaster and left me with one burning question which I have not been able to answer to this day. Why were so many educated professionals so beholden to a high school dropout? The dysfunctionality located itself along this parallel and manifested itself strictly along this parallel. At times, it got so bad that even if one argued about the time of day, which could have been verified by a number of objective sources, the outcome would invariably be that which the Hlaudi group wanted. My protestation to bring a semblance of sanity to the board fell on deaf ears. For instance, On 9 February 2015, I requested the chairperson, Professor Maguve, to convene a special board meeting based on a letter written to the board by Mr. Gavin Davis, a member of parliament. In that letter, Mr. Davis raised the issue of that the amended memorandum of incorporation with ultra vires the Act, the Companies Act, and the Constitution. I informed the chairperson that these issues were new to me. No meeting was called. On 29 April 2015, and in furtherance of my concern that the memorandum of incorporation could be ultra vires the Act and therefore unlawful, I brought to the attention of the company secretary, Ms. Teresa Caldenes, some information I had gathered about the distinction between laws of specific application and laws of general application, and requested her to obtain a legal opinion from the SABC's legal department. Nothing was done. The appointment of Hlaudi Motsoeneng in July 2014 as Chief Operating Officer is probably the best example where the curious cocktail between the non-executive and executive board members, aided and abetted by the Honourable Minister, was mixed. The facts are well known. I voted against the appointment of Hlaudi. The manner in which the board dealt with the Public Protector's report left one in no doubt that the board had no respect for good corporate governance, a Chapter 9 institution, and the Constitution and Parliament. Ms. Ellen Shabalala, the previous board chairperson, was a primary driver of this morass of dysfunctionality. Her conduct bordered on criminality. On 27 September 2016, and after witnessing the appointment of Hlaudi Motsoeneng as Group Executive for Corporate Affairs on television, I wrote to the company secretary to impress upon the chairperson the need to convene an urgent board meeting. I received a negative response from Ms. Caldenes about 2 hours before the board was due to meet the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Communications on 5th October 2016 in this room. One could go on citing other serious breaches of governance, but in a nutshell, this is where the board went astray and why I believe it was dysfunctional. To enable the Hlaudi Group to manage the affairs of the corporation on a simple majority, some non-executive board members were removed unlawfully, and 2 unsuccessful attempts were made to remove me as a board member. Point 3, the unlawful removal of 3 non-executive board members. In my view, the late Hope Zinde, Ronnie Lubisi, and Rachel Kalidas were removed as board members on frivolous and unlawful grounds. The late Hope Zinde attended an ANC workshop on communications. 3 other board members, Ms. Imlakaza, Dr. Shizumba, and I attended that workshop and participated in the deliberations. Ms. Zinde was charged for divulging SABC information to a third party without consent, and on a simple majority vote of the board proposed by the chairperson, Professor Maguve, she was removed as a board member. Mr. Ronnie Lubisi was charged for having a conflict of interest for being the named auditor of 2 companies which did business with the SABC. Despite my explanation of what constituted the conflict of interest and Mr. Lubisi's protestation that he did not do any business with these companies, besides registering them, he was removed as a board member on a simple majority vote of the board, proposed by the chairperson, Professor Maguve. Ms. Kalidas was charged with fraud for having left an audit committee meeting early to catch a flight, whereas it was subsequently established that she did not fly out that day. Once again, she was removed as a board member on a simple majority vote of the board, proposed by the chairperson, Professor Maguve. Point 4, attempts by the minister and the board to remove me as a member. 2 attempts were made to remove me as a board member. The first was by the Minister of Communications in January 2015. I was summoned to a meeting with the minister one evening. The minister was not available to meet me, and 2 of her employees conducted the meeting. I was told that I did not attend meetings and I was disruptive in meetings. I told him I was convinced that the information presented to me was incorrect, but if the minister persisted, I would tender my resignation. Whilst driving home, the minister called to apologize, to tell me that I was an asset to the board and should not even contemplate resigning. A few days later, I received a letter from the very same minister. asking to show cause why I should not be removed as a board member for failing to discharge my fiduciary duties. I decided to respond in writing to the minister, telling her that her conduct bordered on illegality and that in law, no action could arise from a dishonorable cause. In short, I asked the Honorable Minister to reconsider her action. I never heard from her again. In my view, this was a classic example of a dysfunctional ministry which compounded the problems of a dysfunctional SABC board. Second attempt was by the board in September 2015, after an oversight visit to the SABC by the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Communications. The board chairperson, Professor Maguve, wanted to have me removed as a board member because I had raised the issue of the 3 dismissed board members with the PPC. In my written response, I said that my interaction was constructive, intra vires the Broadcasting Act, and within the expectation and contemplation of the shareholder. I never heard from the good professor again on my removal. For the contract between SABC and MultiChoice, prior to my appointment as a board member in September 2013, the interim board had signed a contract with MultiChoice which drew widespread condemnation in the media. At the board meeting in October, many board members raised the issue of the contract with MultiChoice. It was also raised by board members with the then Minister Karim. The chairperson, Ms. Shabalala, acceded to my request that I consider the contract and provide the board with a legal opinion. At a subsequent meeting, I advised the board that the contract was unlawful and submitted reasons for arriving at this conclusion. The chairperson suggested that the board obtain a second opinion, which was subsequently done and which contradicted my opinion. After I made my input to the board, I received a call from Mr. Imtiaz Patel, the Group Chief Executive of MultiChoice. He wanted to congratulate me on my appointment. I obliged because he was an old friend. After some small talk, we went straight into the SABC MultiChoice contract, and he wanted to know what was the reasons for my opposition. Needless to say, I was shocked that the board was so leaky. Nonetheless, I gave him the reasons and suggested that the contract should be terminated and a new contract on more equitable terms should be concluded. He agreed with the proposition and said that the SABC MultiChoice contract was concluded very hastily. This contract and incident was the first stage that I was heading down a long and rocky road.
Thank you, Mr. Naidu. See, this inquiry has to be fair. We can't only focus on the alleged bad issues. Your statement also deals with some good things that took place at the corporation. Can you deal with those?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, not everything about the SABC is bad. I brought along a few meeting board packs to show the professionalism in which these are put together. Sometimes these packs are delivered to my home by SABC staff late at night. These qualities bear testimony to the hard work and dedication of SABC Secretariat. The staff of the SABC constitutes a rich tapestry of experience, knowledge, skill, talent, and institutional memory, and are a priceless national asset in our young democracy. What is required is to conjure up the political will to do the right thing and place the SABC on a trajectory to enable it to deliver its basic output, to inform, educate, and entertain, and play a role in social cohesion and nation building. In that process, we can build a strong state-owned entity we can be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Naidu. In your statement in page 2, paragraph 3, you make a distinction between two groupings in the board. Who belonged to which grouping within the board?
Well, Well, looking from the time of inception, let's go back to September 2013 under the chairpersonship of Ellen Shabalala. Well, she was certainly in the Schlaudi camp. I'm trying to think of, well, Dr. Shidzumba. Yeah, I think they, and of course the three executives, Schlaudi, Motsoeneng, and others. But then the board dissipated quite quickly with the removal of board members, and it left just myself and Ronnie Lubisi was removed, Rachel Kalidas was removed. They were part of the group that were very serious about, corporate governance and executing fiduciary duties at the board. And we were left, in the end, we were left with 9 board members, 6 non-executive, 3 executive, and it was just Mr. Mavuso and I that were trying to oppose everything. So, in a way, the outcome of votes were very predictable. It was always 7-2 in favor of the Schlaudi group.
The issue around the amendment of the Memorandum of Incorporation, you requested it be placed on the board agenda. And your response is that it was never done. Were you appraised of any reasons as to why this never happened?
Well, the amendments to the MOI was really initiated by the minister, and it seems that the intention was, one is to find an easier way to remove board members. And what I found very unusual about that MOI is that it relied on the Companies Act, Section 71 of the Companies Act, to remove board members. But unfortunately, the minister and her crew did not have the courage to put in a provision to admit board members, because if they had put in a simple provision of admitting board members in terms of the Companies Act, then they wouldn't be just left with 1 board member today. So the fallacy of that whole aspect, and I believe it's ultra vires, the Memorandum of Incorporation on this basis. You cannot substitute a law of specific application, which is the SA Broadcasting Act, with a law of general application. The SABC Act is very, very specific as to the role of the appointing authority for appointing board members and how board members are removed in terms of this inquiry like you're having today. So it's very specific, very detailed. Now, one can't take a simplistic approach, as is done in the MOI, to remove board members just by simple voting around the table.
My question is, were you given any reasons why this important document would not be a subject of a discussion by the board?
No, we were not given many reasons, except that this was driven mainly by the ministry, and I think with the company secretary who played a role in developing that document. And after I got sight of the document, sometime in July 2014, around there, I then made an input to the company secretary, giving an opinion. I did some research, and I picked up a case in the US, and I told her, look, we needed to research this because that dealt with why it would be unlawful to take a law of general application like the Companies Act and substitute it for a law of specific application like the SABC Broadcasting Act. In fact, nothing was done about that, as I said in my presentation. But that in itself, I thought, made the MOI unlawful. The second point is that it also affected the way executives were appointed in the corporation. I mean, there used to be a process in the past which required some kind of board intervention or approval or certification. But that has been taken away completely, so it became the function of the CEO and the COO to appoint executives. And what I found after the MOI became, law at SABC, you would attend meetings, and every meeting you'd find different people. So you ask yourself, but what happened to Joe Soap who was here at the last meeting? Oh, he's either been suspended or left. So you had this large turnover of staff. They were either suspended or they left. And you had all these acting appointees holding very, very senior positions. Now that in itself is a factor which contributes to dysfunctionality.
I accept you hold strong legal views around the differences of interpretation. And I don't want us to spend too much time there because, as I understand, this matter is a subject of a litigation, is that correct?
It is a subject of litigation, yeah, by those board members that were removed.
I'm interested in your second last paragraph on page 2. You say the appointment of Hlaudi Motsoeneng in July 2014 as Chief Operating Officer is probably the best example where the curious cocktail between the non-executive and executive board members, aided and abated by the Honorable Minister, was mixed. What do you mean by this statement? And secondly,
Well,
who is the minister you're referring to here?
The minister on that date was Honorable Faith Mutambi. The unusual aspects, firstly, I mean, the board meeting took place late one evening, probably at about 6 or 7 o'clock. And I suppose that was done to accommodate some board members. But what made it even more unusual, apparently the minister was on the premises of the SABC. And it appeared that she had had a prior discussion with the chairperson at the time, Ellen Shabalala. So we had this board meeting and we were given a legal opinion by an attorney on behalf of Mr. Motsoeneng, who told us what a great chap he was and that he had been acting for far too long and there was a need to consider him as a permanent COO of the SABC. So that was the prelude to this discussion. There was some discussion. There was a lot of opposition from those who felt that due process was not being followed. But nonetheless, it led to a kind of split in the House, a narrow split by, I think it was a split vote of about 6 against 5. 6 in favor of his appointment and 5 against his appointment. After that simple decision was taken, the minister was brought in. She thanked the board for having considered that matter. That is a matter of appointing Mr. Motsoeneng as permanent COO of the SABC. She said she'll consider that recommendation because it went to her as a recommendation from the board. By that stage, it was about 11 o'clock that evening. And lo and behold, by 8 o'clock the next morning, she made a public announcement that Mr. Motsoeneng was the permanent COO of the SABC, so she probably considered it in her dreams.
At the bottom of that page 2, where you deal with the manner in which the board dealt with the public protector's report, you say it left one in no doubt that the board had no respect for good corporate governance. A Chapter 9 institution of the Constitution and Parliament. Those are very serious allegations. What do you mean by that?
Well, unbeknown to us as board members, the interim public protector's report was given to the chairperson, Ms. Ellen Shabalala, in November of about 2013. And this was not disclosed to the board. So when the final report came out in about February or March 2014, as a board we were very concerned that we were not presented with an interim report, but a final report. It then emerged from the chairperson at a board meeting that in fact she was given the report 3 months previously, but because the letter was addressed to her, she thought it was for her personal consumption only and never disclosed it to the board, and I thought that was very, very amateurish in my view. But in the meantime, she had solicited the services of an attorney and she was busy processing a response to that report, basically in defense of herself and in defense of Hlaudi Motsoeneng. And it also transpired that in that interim period after she had received the report, she had actually made representations to the public protector before the final report was published. So the board had no input into that final report.
Ms. Chabalala was also a non-executive board member. She was not an executive chairperson. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Subsequent to Mr. Motsoeneng's appointment as Group Executive for Corporate Affairs on television, you wrote to the company secretary. What happened then?
Well, the reason I wrote to the company secretary is that about a week after, I think, the Supreme Court of Appeal made its decision, I made my input to the board, and my input simply was that decision of the SEA effectively terminated the employment relationship between the SABC and Mr. Motsoeneng. In other words, it was time to pack his bags, that decision in Bloemfontein. But it seems that the board, the executive group CEO, Mr. Aguma, had gone on his own without board approval, and based on the advice of some lawyer at the SABC, appointed Mr. Hlaudi Motsoeneng as Chief Corporate Affairs, Head of Corporate Affairs. Now, in my view, that was unlawful. And I came to the conclusion that here we had somebody who had no right to be at a national key point. In fact, he was squatting at a national key point because that appointment was unlawful. So I thought it was appropriate for the board to meet. It was a serious issue, the board to meet and discuss it. But I didn't get a response. In fact, I got a response about 2 hours before our presentation to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on the 5th of October, which was about 8 or 9 days later. A negative response.
The last question from myself relates to the example of the Joe soap you referred to. There were changing of faces of the executives for various reasons. But I want to link this to the MOI. My understanding is that the MOI, before it was amended, gave the board powers to oversee the appointment of executives. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that this amended MOI took those powers from the board and gave them to the executives.
Yeah, it vested all those powers in the executives. In other words, changes could occur at a very senior level within the SABC without board knowledge.
Thank you, Chair, for that question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vanara. Your 5 minutes starts now, Honorable Mokoena.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Naidu, are you well? Let me just get straight to the point. Where's Hlaudi getting his power from?
I'm sorry?
Where is Mr. Hlaudi Motsoeneng getting his power from?
I don't know. I mean, that's a question I've been asking myself, even in my presentation. You know, it's very unusual for any individual in a state-owned entity to behave in this particular manner. So either he's on a frolic of his own, or he's getting support by parties that I'm not aware of.
Okay. The amendment to the MOI, are you in concurrence with the belief that it was done solely by the minister without the consent of the board?
Well, it was done substantially by the minister and her team within the ministry, with some participation from the SABC Secretariat. That's my understanding.
But it would have been, it would need to be approved by the board.
Yeah,
and it wasn't.
but the board never participated in the development, other than copies being sent to us from time to time. We raised our objections and made our protestations, but in the end, it was passed.
Do you have the letter in which you advised the minister that the MOI was illegally constituted? the amendments?
Yeah, I've got a copy of a short opinion that I sent to the company secretary, which I will make available to the committee.
And then the public protector's report, do you have evidence that the minister was advised that the appointment of Mr. Motsoeneng was in contradiction of the public protector's report and therefore illegal?
When you mean the minister was advised, at what point would the minister be advised?
Well, what was she not advised? What was she not advised that the process that took place in order to instate Mr. Hlaudi was illegal? In terms of the report, was she not advised as to that fact?
No, there was, well, two things, I think. First is, at the time the appointment was made, the public protector's report was made public. So the minister would have had an obligation to take cognizance of that fact. And the fact that the person that she was seeking to appoint was damned in that report, was subject to a whole lot of investigations, and the recommendation in that report was this particular individual should go through a process of a disciplinary inquiry. So the question then becomes that was that a proper appointment? Was that a considered appointment? Did the minister apply her mind properly to that appointment? And that's why the Western Cape High Court and the Supreme Court of Appeal made the finding that this appointment was made without proper application of one's mind.
Okay, no, that's fine. Okay, then the executive then appointed him as the group corporate executive.
You're talking about corporate executive or CEO?
No. I was talking about CEO
okay,
then.
thank you.
I'm now talking about the...
in September 2016.
Yeah. Was the board advised... was there a board meeting that happened? Was the board advised of the decision to reinstate him in another position? And was the minister advised on the illegality of that appointment?
Well, as a board member at the time, I read about that appointment in the newspapers. I saw it on television, sorry, that Mr. Motsoeneng was appointed as group chief executive, and that prompted me to write this letter to the company secretary for the attention of the chairperson, because in my view, that was an unlawful appointment.
But in light of the fact that the MOI was then amended, is that MOI, the amendments to the MOI, what gave the powers to the executive to then reappoint him at a lower...
Notwithstanding the appointment of the MOI, the appointment of Mr. Motsoeneng was unlawful, firstly by virtue of the SCA decision. That decision was the trigger that said this person had no place at the SABC.
Unfortunately, my dear friend, Injal.
I had the last one.
Injal, Mr. Mhlangu Honorable.
Chair, thank you. Mr. Naidu, let me start at the end. The multi-choice contract, you have a problem with it. Is this emanating out of your fiduciary responsibility to SABC, or because the media had queried that question?
Well, Chairperson, at the time we joined the board in September 2013, there was this huge media rage about this particular contract. So as part of my fiduciary duties, I offered the chairperson at the time my services as an attorney, and I said, look, let me have a look at it. So I think I was the only board member that really saw that contract. No other board member saw it. So I went through it, drew up a written opinion, gave it to the board, and then I got this call from MultiChoice, and I went across, and and for the reasons, I mean, I can go into the detail, but I don't think this is the relevant stage to do it.
Okay.
But it was clearly an unlawful contract, and it's something that should not have been signed in my view.
Okay. The next question: the meeting that you had in January 2015, who convened the meeting? Who summoned you to the meeting?
The meeting with the minister, the minister.
Yes. Was it the minister?
The minister was holding one-to-one, meetings with various board members. And my meeting was set for, I think, 7 o'clock that evening at the office in Pretoria.
But you then met the minister's staff?
Yeah, when I got there, the minister had just popped across to see the president. And so the meeting was started by the minister's advisor and some other gentleman from her department.
You know the people or you don't?
I know the one person. He was the advisor at the time, Dan, I forgot his surname, Mancha. Dan Mancha, I think. Yeah, I don't know who the other gentleman was.
According to you as a board member, do you consider the minister as an internal player or an external?
I think, well, the minister, generally, the role of the minister would be one of political oversight. I just think that the minister came a bit too close to the action at the SABC.
The role of the company secretary, especially in the matters that you have raised as...
I think that the company secretary could have done a lot more to give proper guidance to the board. You know, a company secretary is somebody, in her case, she was a chartered accountant, but a company secretary also has to give some kind of legal guidance on procedure. Now, you know, when as a board member you write to the company secretary and say, please bring this matter to the attention of the chair, because it's only the chair and the deputy chair in terms of the act that can convene board meetings. We don't have powers to call board meetings. So we have to submit it to the company secretary, who then brings it to the attention of the chair. Now, I thought that the company secretary should have realized the import of some of the issues that were going around without proper discussion, without proper investigation. For example, the appointment of Mr. Motsoneng as Group Chief Corporate Affairs Officer, that was a serious matter which warranted a meeting. Now, a company secretary should implore upon the chairperson, who is not a lawyer, who does not have legal experience, and probably even less experience as chairperson in terms of good corporate governance, should advise that gentleman that, look, I think this is sufficiently serious to warrant a meeting. Now, that's where the company secretary came short, in my view, on many instances.
Chair, soon my time is over.
No, you got a minute, sir.
Oh, thank you. Wait. Now, as a member of the risk committee, did you often review, King 3 directs that board members should at least review the risk profile, risk policy, and what have you, annually. Were you doing it over your period in the SABC?
The risk committee met regularly, quarterly. In fact, we met every 3 months, and we did a very thorough analysis of the risk facing the corporation. All the risks, not just financial, physical risks, technology, risks in technology.
I want to then assume that the things that have been raised here as red flags would have been contained in your risk analysis profile.
Depending what things,
Well, the things that we're talking about, your multi-choice, your minister's interference, your secretariat ability.
We didn't deal with those elements of risk. The multi-choice, if you recall, was dealt with right at the outset in September 2013. The minister's role within the SABC is not something that would ordinarily fall within the ambit of the risk committee. We had terms of reference for the various subcommittees, and that did not fall within the terms of reference.
Thank you so much, Mr. Naidu. Can we move over to Honorable Van Dam?
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Naidu, so I just want you to talk to me through, So on the 20th of September 2016, the SCA denies Mr. Motsoneng leave to appeal, which means he must pack his bags. 2 days later, there's a draft resolution circulated to all board members requesting that he be appointed as acting COO. And then on 27 September, he's instead appointed as GE Corporate Affairs. What happened between the 22nd of September and the 27th of September?
I'm not aware of, nothing has happened in my view as a non-executive board member, but I can only piece together what happened after the fact. Some of us, I mean, in my speaking for myself, I disapproved of that round robin resolution to appoint him. And in my comment section on the round robin document, I stated why. Because it would have been unlawful to appoint him pursuant to the SCA decision. The minister, normally these round robin resolutions go to the minister in the case of Mr. Motsoeneng because he's one of the 3 executives. And I think the minister was persuaded by that argument and she did not appoint him as COO. And then it was up to James Aguma, who was acting CEO, who then took it upon himself on the advice, as he says, on the advice of the lawyer of the SABC to appoint him as head of corporate affairs. So that's how it came about. So that's what happened between those 5 days.
Yes, the GE Corporate Affairs position was not approved by the board, am I correct?
No.
Yes. And then Ms. Bessie Tungwana's appointment instead as acting COO, was that approved by the board?
No, I mean, I only realized she was the acting CEO when I met her here on the 5th of October.
So that would have not been approved by the board?
Now, ordinarily, it should have been approved by the board or gone to the minister as a recommendation from the board, but it never came through the board.
Okay, so who would have approved that appointment then? Would have to be the minister?
The minister would make the final appointment acting on the recommendation of the board.
Okay, so since there was no board approval, one could then say that it was a decision taken by the minister without approval from the board.
Well, I'm not even sure whether the minister approved that appointment because my understanding is that because the board had not made the recommendation, Mr. Kwana's calling herself the COO was unlawful, you know. So even if the minister appointed her, it would have been an unlawful appointment.
But, I mean, because so one of the witnesses said yesterday, the minister is a lawyer, she's aware of the legislative requirements. She should have known that she cannot approve an appointment which hasn't been approved by the board, am I correct?
Yeah, and it's not difficult to remember that there's just 3 top executives at the SABC. We're not dealing with 3,000 people. Now, it's simple to remember as a minister that these 3 people, there's a due process. They must be considered by the board, recommended to me, and then I apply my mind. So it's not difficult for the minister to remember that.
So that appointment would essentially be unlawful?
It is unlawful.
Right. The draft resolution on the 22nd of September, who would have been that source of that draft resolution?
Well, I've got a copy here. Normally the resolutions are put out by the company secretary, Ms. Caldenes.
On instruction of?
Presumably on the instruction of the chairperson.
All right. One more question, Chair, if I've still got time. On the 1st of August 2016, Mr. Motsoeneng announced publicly that he had decided to give 50,000 each to 180 local musicians. Would that be a decision which would have
well, if he
been
gave
approved
it out
by
of
the
his
board?
own pocket, that's fine. I don't have a problem. But if it was SABC funds, then it never came through the board.
It was SABC funds, so that was
well,
not.
Then it wasn't approved by the board.
Are you aware of any other decisions taken by Mr. Motsoeneng which would have required board approval that didn't have board approval?
I remember there was this controversial decision about local content. You know, Mr. Motsoeneng decided that there must be 90% local content so that more money can flow to local artists. The sentiment was fine, but the manner in which he went about it was wrong, in my view.
Thank you so much. Sir and ma'am, could we move over to the Honorable Khoza?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, let me probably start by imploring on you, Mr. Naidu, to be as brutally honest with us as possible and be frank with us, because the intention is to restore good governance at SABC and ultimately to all the state-owned enterprises. Having said that, Chair, sir, as a lawyer, would you concede that there had then no been political interference? Mr. Motsoeneng would not have been appointed either as COO or GE Corporate Affairs.
Well, you know, to get appointed at that level would require some kind of political intervention, assuming one follows due process. Ultimately, the minister has to confirm the appointment of those people. Now, if they were appointed absent due process, then that's political interference.
Thank you. Would you probably identify other political key players other than the minister that you think might have played a role in this process?
Well, I think, you know, I was quite surprised by the views of the previous Parliamentary Portfolio Committee regarding the 3 non-executive board members that were dismissed. You know, it was clear as daylight that was unlawful. But for some strange reason, that Portfolio Committee took the view that it was lawful. So, you know, how does ordinary, sane members of Parliament come to that conclusion? So that was a bit startling.
So are you suggesting that the Portfolio Committee also played a role, the Portfolio Committee on Communication played a role somehow?
Well, unless, if it wasn't a political intervention, then they probably were not clued up on the law.
Okay, thank you, sir. Could you kindly identify, earlier on you alluded to the fact that there were 3 points of contention with the multi-choice contract. Could you identify at least the 3 in their chronological sequencing, according to you?
In that particular contract?
Yep.
I can give you the main point of contention, because
Okay.
I think it might be a bit awry of me to now go into commercial confidentiality issues. But the thing
we won't
that's
allow you to do that. The role of the board is fine if you went to that one, but we don't want to get the nitty-gritty of...
Okay, but I can just give the main issue in that contract that raised a flag for me as a practitioner is that contract purportedly was an agreement by MultiChoice to use archival material of the SABC. I mean, that was the basis of that contract, but it was made subject, the entire contract or the payment to SABC of that, under that contract was made subject to the condition that the SABC will adopt a particular position on a set-top control. Now, I found that very, very strange and totally unrelated. And that's why that contract was unlawful. Secondly, of course, the person that signed it had no authority to sign that contract.
Thank you, sir. I just want to ask you something that has got to do with the retrogression of the financial, the audit opinion by the Auditor General and the irregular expenditure. As you know, you came from 3.4 billion in almost 3.4 billion in 2013, 2014, 2015. You improved it drastically. But then 2015, 2016, you started going back to, almost going back to where you were. What do you think are the key main factors that are leading to this state of, retrogression?
Well, the factors given to us by the executives of the SABC was that there was a downturn in the economy, so that there was less income on advertising revenue. So, I mean, that was a fair point to make. That led to the retrogression you speak of, honorable member. Secondly, there was a write-down of license fees. You know, we had about 2 billion rand of unpaid, uncollected license fees. And these things were outstanding for a very long time. And the debate was the question of prescription. You know, does it prescribe after 3 years, or does it follow the state rule of 15 to 30 years? That debate went on for a year. And this year we resolved that it was a 3-year prescription. So we had to write down about 2 million rand of, we had to write off 2 million rand of license fees.
2 million or 2 billion?
2 billion, sorry, 2
Okay.
billion. And then there were certain other issues concerning the VAT. There was this debate between SABC and SARS on when do you charge VAT when you pay license for the SABC. Is it at the time you issue the license? Is it on accrual or on invoice? And Mr. Motoneng and the group CEO, Mr. Aguma, spent a fair amount of time and achieved a measure of success, in my view, in trying to resolve that dispute, although it's still unresolved. So these factors taken together led to a retrogression in the financials.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, sir.
The Honorable Oliver.
Thanks. Sorry. Thanks, Chair. I'm partially covered by my colleagues except for two areas that I need clarity on, Mr. Naidu. The first one is to say, you sat in about 5 subcommittees at the SABC, and those subcommittees are supposed to have resolutions that are taking the institution forward. What impact did resolutions of all the committees you sat on had on the running of the institution?
I think the subcommittees were well run. The debates were very good in the subcommittees, and the resolutions were good, all directed at benefiting and furthering the interests of the organization. The dysfunctionality came in how in the two camps, so to speak. So, in other words, one can't fault the functioning of the subcommittee, which led to dysfunctionality. I think the dysfunctionality came in the manner in which certain non-executive board members, together with certain executive board members, took decisions in the corporation.
Are you, in a way, indicating that there were good resolutions which never saw light in terms of implementation?
No, the subcommittee resolutions were mainly there to support the organization. For example, on the audit committee, which I sat on as a member, we looked at the past problems in the corporation, how we could resolve them, like, for example, writing up an asset register, which didn't exist in the past. So it was all developmental issues leading to a better SABC.
And the last one is, when you received a letter or when you responded to the chairperson when he wanted to take you out of the board, did you respond in Braille?
No, I responded in normal English, in writing. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Maybe that's why he didn't get back to me. He didn't see it.
You done, ma'am? You done? Honorable Killer.
Chairperson, thank you. I would like to ask Mr. Naidu, first of all, when you started, was there any induction program for new board members? And were you sort of everybody brought on par as far as the legislative framework is concerned? And that includes that at that stage, the memorandum of incorporation.
Yeah, I think that was one of the shortcomings, and I know that the company secretary complained very bitterly about the fact that the board members were not properly inducted into the organization. And the reason being that when we were appointed as board members, there were several issues consuming the organization, so we had to get straight into the issues. I mean, the SABC multi-choice deal, and then in the next year we had the whole Schlaudi Motsoeneng appointment issue. So I think that was a major failing. We should have been properly inducted, and perhaps we could have added much more as board members to help the corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Naidu. Secondly, you see, that is part of the problem as from our perspective, is clearly there were individuals driving from the chair position as sort of an executive chair position, whereas it was very much an organization based on board decision making. So that also contributed to dysfunctionality. Secondly, I would like to come back to the amendments of the MOI. When were you made aware, and is that not a board function to adjust the memorandum of incorporation? We have 2 copies of different ones. One signed in October 2014 and the other one signed somewhere in 2016. Are you aware of those? Have you received it? Were it discussed? Any of those documents, were they discussed?
We received draft copies of the MI from time to time. You know, there were several amendments being made to it. And I think around 2014 or 2015, I can't remember the date, it was subsequently approved. But the problem with the MOI, it was done, I think, in contravention, in my view, of the Broadcasting Corporation Act, to some extent the constitution of the country. So when you start amending documents like the MOI, and you don't take due cognizance of the legal framework in which that MOI should have been drawn, that's where the problem started, in my view. And that's why I believe it's ultra vires the act.
But you, as a lawyer, and clearly it should have been a very difficult process for you to belong in a board as a legal person. Did you at any stage put anything in writing apart from alerting the company secretary? Did you present any document to the board? Did you say, this is ultra vires, we cannot go on like this is against the Broadcasting Act, etc.? Or did you not have such an opportunity?
Now, I've written about 3 or 4 letters to the board through the company secretary, offering legal advice. I mean, that was my expertise. And that's why I joined the board in the first place, because I was told when I was recommended to join this board that this board needs some legal advice. So please, consider applying, and which I did, and I was appointed. So my expertise was to help a board that had problems at the time of the appointment, but needed advice. So we went in with good intentions, thinking that, with our little expertise, we could make it a better SABC.
Then the Public Protector report, when that was released, it was in fact shortly after you became a member of the board. And subsequent events then turned out that a person that was accused of, well, the Public Protector's comment here is saying, allegation that Mr. Motsweneng committed fraud is substantiated. Did you at any stage during the meeting where he was appointed in July, did you at any stage raise that issue? Did you put it in writing to say that we cannot endorse this because of the findings of the Public Protector and that the board will be remiss in its duty? Because that also is flying in the face of the Memorandum of Incorporation, by the way, which was the reigning one at that particular stage.
Well, the whole basis of the opposition to Mr. Motsweneng be appointed as CEO was the Public Protector's report. How does one appoint a person into a senior position in a corporation like the SABC in the light of all of these damning findings? So there had to be due process first. Beside his his educational qualifications did not warrant that he be given that job in the first place, notwithstanding the Public Protector's report. But put that aside, the educational qualification and the fact that there were so many clouds around him required some kind of process, due process, to clarify issues before he should be considered. So I think he had an incapacity from 2 points of view. One is he lacked the educational qualifications to warrant appointment as a COO, number one. Number two is, with all these clouds around him, it had to be cleared before he could be considered for appointment. And I think any rational person in the position of the minister should have taken that into account.
Thank you very much. No, thank you very much. Honorable Chauke.
No, thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Naidu, when did you resign as a board member?
On the 5th of October 2016.
Where?
Where?
Yes.
When I made a presentation to the Portfolio Committee, Parliamentary Portfolio Committee.
Why did you take a decision that day when you were in Parliament, to resign in Parliament?
No, I took a decision well before that. I just thought it was a nice platform to announce it.
Can you elaborate on your presentation on page 3, the top paragraph that deals with Adan Chabalala as a driver of dysfunctioning of the board and their conduct bordered on the criminality? Can you just elaborate on that part?
Yeah, you see, Ms. Chabalala, it subsequently came to our knowledge, had a copy of the interim report in November of the previous year. It was not disclosed to the board. Now, when you look at fiduciary duties of board members, there are 4 things. 1, you have a duty of good faith. You have a duty to act loyally. You have a duty to disclose information. You see, so when you don't disclose information, and if you have regard to the King rules around governance, and even the amendments to the Companies Act since 2008, if you act in a particular way, contrary to the fiduciary responsibilities of a director, which we were on the SABC board, you could attract criminal liability. That's the law.
So what did you do about that when you discovered these abnormalities?
Well, what did I do at that stage? Well, of course, we were very upset with Ms. Shabalala that she didn't tell us about this. But of course, she then came across very naively saying that, well, I thought it was addressed to me personally, so that's why I didn't disclose it to you. Now, either she was being very honest with us, and she was naive, or she was being dishonest. I couldn't make out the distinction there.
Now, let's go back to the report of the public protector and the position of the board to deal with the findings of the public protector. And what is your position there? Because you've been a member of the board that dragged, in fact, you arrived at the time when the report was then tabled. And I thought that was the time that you'll have jumped ship when you realize that, in fact, these people are just breaking the law. What is your view on that? And come again on the issue of judicial review. Was there any discussion in the board to take such a decision, or a resolution of the board to take such a decision?
It was recommended to the board that when you are dealing with the public report of the public protector, you really have two options. One is to accept the findings. Two is to take it on court on judicial review if you're not happy with the findings. That proposition was put to Ms. Shabalala, but instead she chose the option of justifying, creating a justification to show that these findings were not correct. Now that's not an option. So I think she chose the wrong route.
And what was your position then?
My position was that this matter should have been taken on review, but it was not accepted by the board.
Obviously, dealing with risk and internal audit, the almost 5.1 billion regular expenditure, which include fruitless and wasteful expenditure. What is your position, and what is it that must happen moving forward, dealing with such a finding of the Auditor General, with your understanding of yourself, PFMA, that deals with maybe without really putting forward the issue of investigation, recovery, and action. I want you to speak on those.
Yeah, I think when one has regard to the unlawful or unaccounted for expenditure by the SABC, one must understand the nature of the animal here. The SABC, sometimes things happen and the SABC is then forced to televise certain events of national importance live, and in that time there's no time to go through the due process. So what I think the way to rectify that is to have a kind of interim process where you can have due process but in a kind of short form. For example, if you look at in the PFMA, you're allowed to do contracting in terms of Section 32 of the supply chain management. In other words, you can have a shorter form of process but ensure that it is due process and not allowing any room for untoward expenditure. So I think there's room or need for improvement in that regard in respect of the SABC, because from time to time they are called upon by government to cover certain events which are not really part of their budget, which is not budgeted for. And I think because of a lack of a paper trail, because of the urgency of situations, it comes up as an audit query.
And then what?
Thank you, sir. Thanks, Mr. Chauke.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Naidu, thank you very much, sir, for availing yourself and for cooperating with the committee in its work. The last thing that I just want to say is that you'll appreciate that we couldn't do or say or ask all the questions that we needed to ask because we're limited by time. However, if there's anything that you subsequently realize is important for this committee, our doors are always open. You can drop a note to Cindy or request some sort of communication, and we will gladly take that and consider it in our final report. So once again, thank you very much, sir, and have a good weekend. After 2 minutes, I see that the next witness, Mr. Molefe, is here, so we'll have about 2 minutes just to catch a deep breath, and then we'll go on to Mr. Molefe. Thank you very much, sir. And you can have. Are you giving these documents?
No,
to
I'm
us?
handing this into the committee.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, sir. No, man. Is it too bright now? But so you can join us at tea if you want to. We're just checking if the tea is available.
Okay.
We're just checking that now.
Can I also suggest that the tea comes with cake?
Mr. Chowke the other day said this is not a place of muffins and whatever, so don't talk about cake.
Well, that's the SABC inquiry continuing in Parliament. Now, we'll keep you abreast of the happenings there. As you know, they're going to take a short break right now, and as soon as they're back, we'll go there. So let's take a break right now, and we'll be right back after that.
What was, the week like in terms of CITES?
I saw there was a news insert about there being genetically engineered sort of rhino horns that have been introduced now. And then that has sort of now been rejected. They're saying that it's sort of going to promote poaching as per se.
The concern that's been raised by law enforcement in that particular regard has been that how do you distinguish between the original and the fake?
Yes.
Because it's going to make it difficult to police.
The rhino horn is the same quality as the nail. If you want something from the rhino horn, just cut your nail and do whatever. What was most striking for me was how the pangolin came into the picture. That was interesting for me because a few years ago in Zimbabwe, if you found a pangolin and you handed it over, you would have an audience with the president.
Wow.
Yeah, and you would be given a certain amount of money. And once that program started, almost every week there was somebody who was getting an audience with the president.
Good morning, welcome back. I'm Kendall Makamate. Time for the sports. We start off our bulletin with a fantastic story that South Africa's Chad le Clos has done it again. He broke a world record at the World Short Course Swimming Championship in Windsor, Canada earlier today. He did so in winning gold in the 100 meters butterfly.
Chad le Clos promised to come back strong in these championships, and he's done just that. After a loose dive, he delivered a near-perfect swim in the 100 butterfly, powering to the front early on. Despite his usual look-arounds, his turns were perfect, and he stayed out in front without any worries. He touched in 48.08, bettering the world record he set in Doha 2 years ago. American Tom Shields took silver with Australian David Morgan in bronze. It's le Clos' third consecutive win in this event.
48.08. The man from South Africa. He breaks his own world record and he takes the gold in the men's 100 fly.
Only one other South African made it past the heats. Douglas Erasmus won his heat in the 50 freestyle, but couldn't emulate his time in the semi-final. He finished 8th, but would have made it comfortably through to the final if he'd clocked a similar time to his heat. So far, all of South Africa's medals at the Games, 2 golds and a silver, have been won by Leclos. The South African team consists of 18 swimmers. Janet Witten, SABC News.
Chad Leclos, the one-man wrecking ball there. Now, FIFA's Ethics Committee has banned former South African Football Association President Kirsten Matandani. This for 5 years after he was found guilty of transgressing 3 general codes of conduct of the committee. Along with Nematandani, former Zimbabwe Football Association President Jonathan Musavengana and former Togo national team coach Banna Chanile were given life bans from all football-related activities. The ban relates to match fixing of international friendly matches against Thailand, Bulgaria, Colombia and Guatemala, played in South Africa in 2010, ahead of the World Cup in which their country hosted. Also included are cases decided by the adjudicatory chamber in October 2015 and March 2016. Nematandani was found guilty of having violated Article 13 of the General Rules of Conduct, Article 15, which is loyalty, and Article 18, which is duty of disclosure, cooperation and reporting of the FIFA Code of Ethics. The adjudicatory chamber decided that Musavengana and Chanile had both infringed Article 13 and 21, which are bribery and corruption of the FCE, and imposed life bans on the 2 former officials. The bans are effective with immediate effect. Now, far from the lofty environs of the Champions League, I see we've got a World Anti-Doping Agency graphic there, but we're going to talk football now. We're far from the lofty environs of the UEFA Champions League. Manchester United was slogging it out with Ukrainian side Zorya Luhansk on a rock-hard pitch in icy Odessa. A hard-fought 2-1 victory sparked United's Hendrik Mkhitaryan, netting his first goal for the club, set up the team's advance to the last 32 of the Europa League. And Senegalese striker Moussa Sow broke Dutch hearts as his acrobatic strike in the 22nd minute was the source of the goal that gave the Turkish side Fenerbahce victory in their final Group A match. Now, here are the highlights of this as well as other selected matches from last night's action.
Uzbayrakli. Great looking ball into the middle towards Alper. Oh, and Moussa Sow! Oh, he's done it again! It's a magnificent goal from Moussa Sow.
Yang, first time ball in, that's lovely control too. And now here's a chance for Adair, and Adair again, and into lead. Italian surface as the ball's headed towards goal and into the back of the net. Showing the character of their team. Here's Adair though, looking to try and get the winner for Inter, and he's done just that.
Vaev playing in the centre now, but loses his footing, and it's a gift for Mkhitaryan running at goal, and the former Shakhtar man, Mkhitaryan scores for Manchester United. They're taking a step nearer the final this evening, and they might wrap it up now with Zlatan on side. It's a 1 against 1, it's Ibrahimovic, and he finishes. Zlatan's done nothing all night, but he took his chance in the 88th minute.
Now it's time to talk about the World Anti-Doping Agency, where Canadian lawyer Richard McLaren will publish the second part of his World Anti-Doping Agency Commission report at a news conference in London this afternoon. The much-anticipated report is expected to provide more detail on an elaborate doping scheme operated by Russia at the 2014 Sochi Olympics. Now, McLaren outlined all of this in his original report released in July of this year.
Following the release of the original report in July, WADA recommended that the entire Russian team should be excluded from Rio Olympics last August. On Wednesday, the International Olympic Committee said it had extended provisional measures against Russia over its doping scandal, pending the evaluation of a WADA commissioned report. McLaren is ready to publish the second part of his report.
Our commission of investigation uncovered the following. First, the Moscow laboratory operated for the protection of doped Russian athletes within a state-directed, fail-safe system, which we describe in the report as the disappearing positive methodology. Second, the Sochi laboratory
Well, that's where we're going to have to leave it. It seems as if that session in Parliament where the ad hoc committees are looking at the fitness of the SABC board to continue holding office is back in session. Let's go back there for live pictures.
In connection with the subject matter of the inquiry, notwithstanding the fact that the answer or the document could incriminate you or expose you to criminal or civil proceedings or damages. You are, however, protected in that the evidence given under oath or affirmation before a House or committee may not be used against you in any court or place outside Parliament, except in criminal proceedings concerning a charge of perjury or a charge relating to the evidence or documents required in these proceedings. I'm informed that you have had sight of that and that you are prepared to take an oath. Is that it, sir? If you are, could you just repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Will be the truth.
Will be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Please say, so help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you very much, sir. It is Advocate 20 to 12. Can we ask you to try and conclude your business by about 10 past 12, sir, if possible?
No, thanks, Chair. Just before I proceed, there is a statement that Mr. Molefe has made. I was under the impression that it was circulated to members, but the members indicate that, or some of them say they haven't received it. If we can just spend some time to distribute it, it will still be fine within the time given to finalize the presentation.
I was under Kendall. How many members have not received it? I apologize for that. And whilst we're doing that, can I request or ask our staff that when proceedings are in process, that we do not walk in between the speaker, please. Rather walk or stay outside. It really makes for bad viewing for the public. I'm asking everybody, when proceedings are underway, that we try and maintain the decorum of this meeting. Honorable Mathango.
I wanted to raise exactly that matter, that when proceedings are on between the chair and whoever is participating, the rule of Parliament does not allow the crossing of the line. So that's an issue I wanted to raise. I'm happy you dealt with it. Thank you.
Okay, let's start, Mr. Molefe. Can you please, for the record, state your full names?
My full names are Thabo Philip Molefe.
You share with the committee your academic background?
My qualifications are postgraduate degree in management from the University of the Witwatersrand, and currently I am studying towards my master's degree with the University of South Africa.
Thank you. You made a statement. That statement is a 4-page document dated the 7th of December 2016. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That statement is before you?
Yes, indeed.
Without interruption, I'll give you an opportunity to go through that statement as a way of presentation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Advocate Vanara, and thank you, Chairperson and members of the committee. My statement starts with a background, and above it, it states my name and the designation that I held at the time, former acting group CEO of the SABC, from July 2011 to January 2012. Background, I was employed at the South African Broadcasting Corporation for almost 20 years, from the 1st of March 1994 to 31 May 2013. During this period, I held several senior editorial and executive positions in the corporation. These included political editor, head of television news, editor-in-chief of radio and television news, head of SABC Africa, head of international affairs, group executive news and current affairs, and lastly, acting group chief executive officer. My statement, Chairperson, covers mainly the period July 2011 to January 2012, when I served as acting group CEO. This submission provides a historical context of the gradual erosion of governance and ethics, as well as the collapse of systems and processes in the SABC. The total disregard for processes and good governance was characterized by irregular appointments and highly questionable decisions. Serving on the board, the appointment as acting group CEO also meant sitting on the board as executive director. At the time, the board of the SABC was made up of 15 members, 12 non-executive directors, and 3 executive directors, namely the group CEO, the chief financial officer, and the chief operations officer, COO. At the time of my appointment, the positions of CFO and the COO were not filled with permanent appointments. The CFO was acting, and the COO position was not filled at all, either permanently or in an acting capacity. The first thing that struck me when I attended my first board meeting was to find that a member of staff who was neither CFO nor COO was allowed to sit in meetings as a board member. This member of staff is Hlaudi Motsoeneng, who at the time had just been appointed group executive, stakeholder relations, and provinces, barely 3 months in the new position. This was a glaring aberration from the norms and standards of the board to have a staff member other than the appointed executive directors sitting in board meetings. I raised this matter with the chairman of the board, Dr. Ben Ngubane, who said to me that Mr. Motsoeneng was sitting in board meetings at the invitation of the board. The Motsoeneng issue was raised again in a subsequent board meeting by a board member, Advocate Awe Mahlati, who wanted to know why Mr. Motsoeneng was allowed to sit in board meetings. This time around, the chairman of the board changed the tune and said Mr. Motsoeneng was participating in board meetings at his invitation, as it was his prerogative to invite whoever he chose to invite. Acting in the absence of the group CEO, in October 2011, I traveled to Seychelles to attend the General Assembly of the Southern African Broadcasting Association, SABA, which is the SADC version of broadcasting, and attended by heads of broadcasting corporations. I appointed a senior member of the group executive, Mr. Anton Hienes, to act as group CEO in my absence in terms of the delegation of authority framework. In my view, everything was done properly and in accordance with the DAF requirements. In fact, I had put forward 2 names for acting in my absence, namely Ms. Charlotte Mampane and Mr. Hienes, but Ms. Mampane was ostensibly rejected by the board. On my return, however, the chairman of the board, Dr. Ngubane, was not happy with the delegation of Mr. Hienes either, suggesting that Mr. Motsoeneng should have been appointed acting group CEO instead. I was then advised that in future I should leave this matter to the board to decide who must act in the event of my absence. The following month, in November 2011, I had to travel to Ghana for the African Union chapter of broadcasting, which is the African Union of Broadcasting, of which I was also a member of the Executive Council. On this occasion, I handed the delegation of authority back to the chairman of the board, who in turn would decide who to appoint to act in my absence. I tried in vain to establish who was going to act while I was away, but the decision was made only after I had left the country. On my arrival in Accra, the capital of Ghana, I received an email from my office informing me that Mr. Motsoeneng had been appointed acting group CEO with effect from 14th November 2011. This came as a shock to me because I had advised against the consideration of Mr. Motsoeneng to serve as acting group CEO while there were very senior group executive members such as Ms. Mampane and Mr. Hienes, among others. The view I held was that Mr. Motsoeneng was very junior and grossly inexperienced to be charged with such an enormous responsibility. To add to this shock, Dr. Ngubane appointed Mr. Motsoeneng to the position of Acting Chief Operations Officer, COO, the following day after the appointment as Group CEO, and that was on the 15th of November, with effect from 18th November 2011, just a day after assuming the role of Acting Group CEO. All these critical appointments were made without the knowledge of the acting group CEO, as I was away on official business. The only conclusion one could draw from these hastily announced appointments within a day of each other was that this was pushed through in haste because I was vehemently opposed to the elevation of Mr. Motsoeneng to such a senior position. Salary increment, 500,000 rand. In late November, Mr. Motsoeneng approached me asking for a salary increment. I refused, and I also pointed out to him that his salary increment was in any case a board decision. Subsequently, Dr. Ngubane called me to his SABC office in early December 2011. When I came into his office, I found Mr. Motsoeneng also present. The chairman then offered me a prepared letter recommending a 500,000 salary increment for Mr. Motsoeneng. Dr. Ngubane asked me to sign the letter in order for him to approve the recommendation. I refused to sign the letter. I told Dr. Ngubane that in no uncertain terms would I agree to that demand. He tried to persuade me, but I stood my ground. And at this point, Mr. Motsoeneng stepped in and said, open quote, "Chair, I told you that this is not our man, so I am going to Pretoria tonight," close quote. Dr. Ngubane pleaded with me, saying, open quote, "Please sign this thing so that we settle this matter," end quote. I refused, nevertheless. This chairperson happened at the time when the process of appointing a permanent group CEO was already underway. I had applied for the position, and the advertisement for applications had closed on December 2, before that meeting took place. And the matter was now in the hands of the board. TNA agreement. In another development, Mr. Motsoeneng initiated a meeting in or about late July with one of the Gupta brothers because they were keen to, open quote, pursue a business partnership, close quote, with the SABC. Several meetings were held mainly with a Mr. Tony Gupta, and the discussions centered around, one, signing an MOU between the SABC and the TNA Media Group, in terms of which the SABC would allow TNA Media Group to have live broadcasts of its breakfast meetings on Morning Live. Two, agreeing to a huge subscription of the New Age newspapers to be distributed in all SABC offices, national and across 9 provinces, at a substantial cost to the corporation. 3, the Gupta Media Group also proposed having a stake in the then envisaged SABC news channel. I did not agree to these proposals. These proposals, Chairperson, in my view, were quite drastic and with significant financial implications. I also did not agree with the proposal to cede a share of the envisaged SABC News channel to an external partner. Such a move would, in any event, require board and ministerial approval. In the end, the position I took did not go down well with the Gupta brothers. Mr. Motswening tried to persuade me, urging me to soften my approach in dealing with the Guptas. I refused, pointing out that I would not make irregular and unjustifiable decisions. In conclusion, Chairperson, it was quite evident from the above that the erosion of governance and ethics, as well as the collapse of systems and processes, had started to take root in the SABC as far back as 2011. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Molefe. I am not going to ask you any further questions, but I would ask the committee to admit the statement as evidence, and I shall see. Thank you.
As pre-warned, Mr. Chauke, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Yeah, we're still preparing this time. We're like ambushed. No, but I think while I'm digesting, I can still start with the first question. No, Chair. Thank you very much, Dr. Molefe, for a detailed, shocking presentation you've just given to the committee. Obviously, I regard you as the founder members of SABC in a democratic society from 1994. And I think the country and everybody knows your role. And I'll take it that this presentation is informed by that rich history that we have. Now, the first question that I want to ask you is that when this engagement with the chairman of the board and with a prepared letter, approach you to sign an increment. And for me, what does this constitute? Was it not constitute criminality or fraud or corruption? What was your view, and what did you do with that when you approached with such an approach that constitutes something unwanted? I mean, that was more of crime that we caused to agree to. What is your position on that?
Well, my position was quite clear that this whole thing was irregular and it could not be justified. And that is why I did not agree to the demand that I should sign an approval for the increment of 500,000 rand.
Follow up to, what you have just said. The meeting to Pretoria, what did you understand by Mr. Taudi going to Pretoria? What was this Pretoria thing? What was your understanding? Or did you know he was going somewhere in Pretoria that was going for, I don't know, maybe do you have any understanding of him saying that this man is not in our group, therefore I'm going to Pretoria?
Well, my understanding was going to Pretoria, it's going to a high authority. Although I did not, in any specific terms, have an idea what that authority in real terms represented, but it meant going to a high authority.
The last one, Chair, will be on the Gupta arrangement. Now that you then have left SABC, was that arrangement or that agreement carried through by SABC in your understanding now of things that you are not succumbing to? Have they gone through now with SABC, meaning that are they in operation?
Well, with regard to point one, I know that the SABC continued to have this arrangement with the TNA Media Group to carry the broadcast engagements live on their morning television broadcast show. With respect to the other 2 points that I alluded to, I don't know what happened to the distribution of the New Age at a subscription cost to the SABC. I don't know what could have happened subsequently. I do know, however, that, and that is with respect to point 3, that the SABC then proceeded to launch SABC News, which sits on channel 404, DSTV, and my understanding is that channel is exclusively run and owned by the SABC. And subsequently, the media group then established its own news channel, which sits on channel 405.
Was that a normal thing for the chairman of the board to always approach you with prepared letters for appointments or for increase?
That was actually the first time the chairperson of the board had approached me with an increase. We had never dealt with an increase at that level. So it was the first time that he had raised this matter about the Hlaudi Motsweneng salary increment.
Thank you very much. Honorable Kile.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, thank you very much. Can you just perhaps remember what was the amount of the deal? And we're talking about the TNA agreement. Could you remember in any way, because you said it was too expensive and, you know, a substantial cost to the corporation. Do you have any idea, can you remember perhaps what was the amount involved?
No, I don't quite remember, but the context to that whole approach was that at the time we were even considering to scale down on the number of newspapers that were distributed in the organization and in the newsrooms. In fact, I had even given a notice that newspapers should be circulated only to people who use newspapers as a tool of trade. But it was quite a costly amount, considering that you also had to carry the costs of other newspapers on a daily subscription arrangement.
Mr. Molefe, would you, if I read your statement, I read in between the lines that you actually allude to the fact that you have applied for the position of Group CEO, but that because you were not the man of a particular grouping, that do you believe that perhaps worked against your appointment to that? Because if we look at your history and your experience, clearly there was nobody to compete with you to assume the role of Group CEO. So you believe that played up against you and your position to occupy that position on a permanent basis?
Absolutely, I agree that that worked against me, because even the timing when this demand was made to me, the demand was made to me at the time when the whole process of appointing a new Group CEO was underway. And it was quite evident to me that that would work against me. But I had chosen to err on the side of ethics and governance.
So basically with a gun against your head, but you stood firm. Now, just to go back to the appointment of Mr. Hlaudi Motsweneng and his sudden sort of participation in board meetings. Can you perhaps tell us if you were aware of how his appointment came about? Who decided that? Was it a board decision? Was it formally done? Was there a restructuring? Or did he just appear and a post was created for him?
The one for group executive.
The one for stakeholder relations
Yes,
with
indeed.
provinces?
Yes,
Yeah.
no. I know because I was in the group executive. That position had been held by Mrs. Phumelele Ntombela Nzimande. She was actually the person who was, her official title was Chief People's Officer. And that CPO position incorporated stakeholder and provinces. She was literally removed from her position to make way for Hlaudi Motsoeneng. And I may hasten to add, Chairperson, that Mrs. Phumelele Ntombela Nzimande was a very, very capable and very excellent person in her duty. And this is actually attested to by the presentations that the SABC made even to Parliament. And the Honorable Killian was on the portfolio committee at the time. So the point I'm making here is there we had a very capable member of staff in the organization who was literally removed from her position without any process as to what had happened to justify her removal. And soon after that, Hlaudi Motsoeneng was placed in her position.
Last question, Chairperson. From your position where you are now, outside you have perspective, do you think Parliamentary Portfolio Committee conducted its business in such a way so as to hold the SABC accountable through all these years?
Which portfolio committee, which period are we referring to?
The period where you sat at senior executive level.
Oh,
up
yes.
to now.
Oh, yes, indeed. The period that I served as acting group CEO, and even just shortly before that, I think that portfolio committee held the SABC to account. And we made regular trips, in fact, to this committee. Seriously, accountability was taken.
I hope the check is not in the envelope. What did I say? The check is in the post, Ms. Killian. I hope not, sir. No. Honorable Olive, 5 minutes starts now.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Molefe, I just want to ask 2 questions. What was the status of Mr. Hlaudi in the meetings? Was he an active participant or an observer? And also, did he attend all meetings after the one where his attendance was queried?
Which meetings of the board?
Yes, board meetings.
In fact, Mr. Motsoeneng had been sitting in board meetings as early as 2010. So I picked it up in 2011 when I was now a board member. But even before then, he was already participating in board meetings. And upon my becoming an executive director and taking my place on the board, he had continued on that course, sitting in board, but really not making any effective interventions or contributions. He just sat in board meetings, but he was there nevertheless.
Thanks. What is the policy of SABC on increments? And did he finally get the 500,000 increment?
If he did get that 500,000 rand increment, it would certainly be after my tenure as acting group CEO. The policy is very clear. Increments could take place on 2 levels. One level is the increment that is subject to the labor process, where the unions would engage management, and finally an increment is agreed at a certain percentage, which is then applied across the board. The second one would be a performance-related increment, which is like a special type of an increment which is accorded to someone who's performing exceptionally. At executive level, that would have to be taken to board and not be decided by a group CEO or indeed by a chairman of the board. A submission will have to be made to the full board to approve such an increment.
The last one is to say, when you left the institution, was it at your own accord, or there were circumstances that led to your departure after you have served 20 years?
I was forcibly removed from the organization, and prematurely, because I had still wanted to continue serving the organization and indeed serving South Africa. But I was literally removed from my job.
Thank you.
Honorable Khoza.
Chair, I just want to say to Mr. Molefe that I am a member of the African National Congress, and the reason why I am putting this on record is because I wanted to assure you that we want to restore good governance at SABC and ultimately in all the state-owned enterprises. And therefore, I would implore upon you to be honest when you are answering your questions as you have been, so that we can get to the root cause of these problems. Now, I know that my colleague Loliwe, as a former trade unionist, would have asked you the question whether you lodged a constructive dismissal with CCMA or whatever institution after you left SABC, or you just left it, and why did you leave that unattended?
Oh. No, in fact, my removal from the organization was preceded by a phantom process called a disciplinary process. And when the date was set for the hearing, the group CEO at the time then reported ill. And when we had to meet, we just got reports that no one was available. And there were delays. Nothing could happen. And there were just unjustified delays in getting the process underway. I then sought legal advice to really get the matter attended to so that I could return to my job. And the legal process also dragged, but finally what happened, to cut a long story short, the SABC then decided to settle, to say we are settling your contract.
No, that's fine, sir.
Yes.
Okay, when did Mr. Motsaneng join SABC?
Mr. Who?
When did Mr. Hlaudi Motsaneng join SABC?
I'm not quite sure because he was employed in the Free State.
Oh, okay.
So I am really not sure when. I don't want to guess that.
Don't worry.
one,
In
yes.
your recollection, can you compare and contrast the qualifications of Mr. Motsaneng and that of Ms. Phumelele Nzimande?
Oh no, it's a world
Briefly,
of it's a world of difference. Mrs. Ntombela Nzimande has a postgraduate qualification.
Okay,
I cannot
thank you.
speak for Mr. Motsaneng.
All right. Was the chairman, Dr. Ngubane, ever challenged for backtracking from his original position where he allegedly attributed the invitation of Mr. Motsaneng to the board meeting to the board, when he backtracked and said, no, he was using his own prerogative as a chairman? Was he challenged by yourself or maybe Advocate Tawe Mahlati, who is cited in your statement?
Oh yes, indeed.
And what was the response?
It became a big issue at the board meeting, and not only Advocate Tawe Mahlati raised it, other board members also joined in to express their disapproval. And of course, at the end of all that, then the board chairperson said, well, it was his prerogative.
I'm going to ask you the question that I asked Mr. Naidu. Can you identify 3 key political players that may have played a role in this misgovernance of the SABC?
I don't quite understand. You say who contributed to all this?
Yes. And I'm zooming into the political players. And there is a reason why I am saying that. I believe that such things sometimes, I'm not saying it can happen, maybe it may not be there, but sometimes when people have some authority somewhere, you've made reference to some authority somewhere, and maybe you have some ideas about which authority is that. And I want you to be honest and share that authority with us. That authority, and I assume, maybe you can answer me, is that authority political or administrative or whatever? What authority are we talking about here?
I'm really not shielding anybody, but your 5 minutes is up, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Van Damme.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Molefe, can you speak to me about the character of Mr. Motsoeneng? How does a person who does not have the requisite qualifications for a specific role find himself as GE stakeholder relations, sitting in board meetings? How does that happen?
I think it's a mystery. I think it's a mystery. But having said that, it's a mystery that points to the existence of something that he derives his power from somewhere. Where does he derive it from? I don't know.
To continue with Honorable Khoza's line of questioning, in my mind, with the facts that I have in front of me, it would appear as if Mr. Motsoeneng has some sort of political protection or someone in high office who constantly, makes sure that Mr. Motsoeneng gets what he wants. Would you say he has political protection?
Yes, that is very possible.
Would you say, was the name of the president, for example, ever mentioned in connection to Mr. Motsoeneng? The current Minister of Communications famously said, Ubaba loves Uhlaudi, we must protect him. When you were CEO, was the name of the president ever mentioned in relation to Hlaudi?
Yes, it was raised.
In what context, sir?
Well, in the context that there is some form of protection from the president himself.
Can you elaborate? When did that happen? Who said that? Please give me details.
Well, I think in the public space, it first emerged when the minister herself said, this is the president's choice. So, I mean, in the public space, that was widely reported on. But also in the corridors, it is something that is widely spoken about, that there must be a force somewhere, we don't know where, but somewhere, that protects him. Because just look at it in the space of the last 5 to 6 years. Very, very senior and experienced executive members of the SABC were removed, starting with Mrs. Ntombela Nzimande, coming with me, and many others, up until fairly recently. And really nothing has happened. But you have also had court rulings and appeals, and you still found that the man stayed on. So clearly that speaks to the existence of a powerful force.
Indeed. Would you say that that powerful force, likely the president, would have supported the removal of? You were removed because you didn't agree with Mr. Motsoeneng. You're the person who took the job after you, Mrs. Makgobo, she was removed from her position. Several people have been removed in their positions because they didn't agree with Mr. Motsoeneng, or maybe because he coveted the positions that they held. Would you say there was some political pressure for people who Mr. Motsoeneng didn't agree with, or whose positions he wanted were removed?
Well, I think with due respect, I have tried to assist the committee to say there is a powerful force, but I would be very wary to speculate as to what that force is. My view, Chairperson, is that the committee has at its disposal the power to pursue this matter further and to investigate and to find out. The Office of the Public Protector has demonstrated that you can actually even establish the whereabouts of people. If someone had said, I'm going to Pretoria tonight, you can establish the presence of the person with military precision. And surely some places there are no shebeens around there to establish that.
Okay,
Where were
thank
they?
you, thank you. One last question. Are you aware of any other deals with the Guptas that may have happened around that time? Other than the TNA deal, were there other instances where the Guptas tried to do business with the SABC?
No, not in my time.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Honorable Masango.
Chair, thank you. Mr. Molefe, you indicated earlier on that Mr. Mtswening came from the Free State. One would assume that he came from Lesedi station because that's the only station that you find in the Free State at the time. Who was the HR at SABC who would have known about Mr. Mtswening's landing at your HQ?
I think at the time, and I'm subject to correction, given honorable member the size of the SABC, but I think at the time the HR person was Mr. Paul Tati, T-A-T-I.
Okay. Going to Pretoria, how did that impact or have an effect after the return from Pretoria on you as well as the SABC? I mean, dealing with that question, you remember there was a discussion with Mr. Ngubane and so on, going to Pretoria, and then if you could just narrate to the committee as to what then did you pick up that this may be the Pretoria effect?
Well, right from the moment when I declined to approve the salary increment, I knew that I had taken on a course that would amount to the jeopardizing of my career. And when did I pick that up? I think a week after that meeting, there were interviews that were going to be held with the board and the agency that was running the recruitment for the Group CEO candidates. And that interview process was tampered with, and the interviews were then postponed indefinitely. And finally, the interviews were held in January instead of the scheduled time in December of 2011. And from that point on, it was quite evident to me that something was now really happening with regard to the veiled threat that had been made.
Before Mr. Mtswening held the group position for whatever that includes provinces and stakeholder, what position was he holding?
Before that, he had been brought to Johannesburg and appointed general manager in the office of the group CEO. And I may hasten to add, Chairperson, that that appointment also, in my view, was irregular because he was literally airlifted from the Free State, straight parachuted into the office of the group CEO and given the title of general manager in the office of group CEO. And that position did not exist at the time.
And who was the group CEO at the time?
Mr. Soli Mokwetli.
Okay. Okay. I guess, Chair, I should end my question here because I think some of the things have been covered by my colleagues previously.
Honorable Mokwena.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Molefe, who was the Minister of Communications at the time? It was Mr. Karim, was it not?
No. The minister at the time was Miss Dina Pule.
Dina Pule?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. The relationship between the minister and Mr. Ngubane, how would you describe that?
I think it was a normal, cordial relationship.
Nothing special about?
No,
that,
nothing
yeah,
really.
yeah.
Yes.
So, when Mr. Hlaudi says that he would leave, that he would go to Pretoria to report on this 500,000 thing, it would be out of the ordinary that he was talking about Miss Dina Pule, who was just a normal minister and doing her work properly, would it?
My take is he had actually made this point that he's going to Pretoria, and it was not necessarily about 500,000.
Okay.
It was in the context of saying, this is not our man.
Okay.
So now I am going to Pretoria.
Did you get a sense, though, that he reported everything, given the fact that he was also just sitting in meetings and not doing anything, that he was reporting to somebody on a regular basis about the goings-on of the SABC?
I mean, it creates such an impression, and it does leave one with that impression that there is a regular contact of sort with this line to Pretoria, if it even gets to a point where we disagree on an increment, that would then trigger the response to say, I will be going to Pretoria.
Okay. The Gupta arrangement, the chair of the board would have been aware of such an arrangement, or at least a suggestion of such an arrangement. Is that correct?
Well, I know that the chairperson of the board at the time was aware of that breakfast thing, because they had attended some of those events with Hlaudi.
Was it executed during his time?
I am not sure. What I know is I had refused to sign that contract.
So it didn't happen in your tenure?
The contract?
Yeah.
The activity happened, but the contract was not signed.
I see. What was the stake of that the Guptas were asking for in the news channel as it was proposed? I know it wasn't signed during your time, but what was the stake that was being propelled at the time?
No, there was no contract with regard to that on paper.
Yeah.
It was a discussion around having a partnership.
But what was the stake of the Guptas in those discussions that they were proposing?
No, that was not stated.
That was not stated.
Yes.
Okay. And then you're leaving the organization with the circumstances quickly in just 15 seconds, because I want to ask you another question.
Not going to ask another question. The 15 seconds left.
Chair, I think you're particularly unfair with me. What was the circumstances? You said you were forced to leave.
Well, basically, I mean, unreasonable demands were made to me. Things like I have to submit the editorial diary to the group CEO every day. Things that I know had never happened in the SABC in all the years that I have been there. And I had reported to group CEOs such as Zwelakhe Sisulu and Mrs. Cecilia Kuzwayo, and there had never been such an expectation from the newsroom More so that even the editorial policy was very clear that editorial decisions vest with the newsroom. So making that situation, therefore, difficult for me to bear, and then writing back to the authority at the time to say, I think this demand goes against the spirit and letter of the editorial policies of the SABC, disciplinary processes were then instituted against me. And then it's the long story that I explained, and finally, that then resulted in my being taken out of the organization.
At that point, sir, I want to say thank you very much. Now, if you don't trust my timekeeping, everybody is at liberty to keep their time individually. I'll be fair to the letter.
No, Chair, I think maybe it may not be you, it may be your watch.
Okay.
Which has a problem with me.
I've got two timekeepers here. Mr. Molefe, thank you very much, sir. But as has become practice, unfortunately, time is what we have to respect. But between today, or between this minute and the 28th of February 2017, when we are due according to mandate to present our report, if something crops up, you are at liberty to keep talking to the committee. You could send stuff to the committee secretary, and as and when these things come to us, I will share it with the committee who sits in open meetings. So this is not the end of the road by a long stretch. If you want to, you are able to and are at liberty to do so. But for now, we wish you well. Have a good Friday, sir. And if we don't see you, have a very Merry Christmas and a prosperous New Year. Honorable members, at this point, we will break for lunch. The next meeting, the next sitting is at 2 o'clock. I know Cindy's already looking at me, probably saying lunch is not ready because we had scheduled it for a bit later. However, we're not going to start with the next one now because it has been scheduled for 2. So you've got between now and 2 to do whatever you want to do, but at 2 o'clock, please be here because we're going to kickstart with the last approach. Thank you very much, and thank you, sir.
Well, hearing there from a former employee and also a person who has had quite extensive executive positions for a number of years within the SABC, including that of acting CEO, Mr. Molefe. He gave some of the most damning revelations that we've heard so far, and being questioned there on today, day 3 of these inquiries into the SABC's board fitness to hold office. He did say there that there has been an erosion of governance that has started to take root in the SABC as far back as 2011. We also heard before him from non-executive board member, former board member Krish Naidu, also giving quite damning revelations into the SABC. They're on a short break. They will resume at 2 o'clock. You're with the Midday Report today with us. We'll take a short break. More coming up just after this.
It's more than a gift, it's capturing summer magic. Get a Galaxy S7 Edge in blue coral for 599 Rand per month on Smart S. Plus, a Gear VR headset or an accessory kit.
On Network, we tell you about Africa's social media and technology landscape.
21st century economies rely on technology to truly thrive.
We have quite a comprehensive portfolio of interventions in the tech entrepreneurship space.
And Africans are using tech and social media to solve the continent's unique challenges.
App Nigeria is an online marketplace.
Radio Vibe is a social media platform for radio music.
That's Network with me, Spumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Central African Time.
Welcome back. South Africa's current account deficit has widened more than expected. It grew to 4.1% of gross domestic product in the third quarter from a revised deficit of